Chapter 648. Shi Mengwan looked at the little baby in Su Qingsang's arms. There was a flash of envy and love in her eyes. Today was Su Qingsang's baby's 1-month birthday party. She had come once when Su Qingsang gave birth. This was her second time coming to Rong City. So cute. This is the sister, right? Yes. This is Nian Nian, the sister. Has the name been decided? Yes. Her name is Hui Yanjin. Su Qingsang held her daughter, her face full of satisfaction. The older one is Hui Yanjing. Good name. Shi Mengwan nodded and her gaze fell on the pink baby's face. The most important thing is that she's really cute. She's so cute that I want to steal her home. Do you like it? Su Qingsang blinked at her. If you like it, hurry up and find a man and have one. Humph. I think you're right. Wan Xianyang had arrived at some point. At this moment, he stood beside Shi Mengwan and looked at her with a hint of eagerness in his eyes. Sister-in-law. Wan. Shi Mengwan nodded at Wan Xianyang as a greeting and quickly stood up. Qingsang, I'm going to the bathroom. Go ahead. She was obviously avoiding Wan Xianyang, which made Wan Xianyang's expression turn ugly. After Shi Mengwan left, he looked at Su Qingsang. Sister-in-law, I'm not that bad, am I? Su Qingsang couldn't answer. Everyone had their own eyes. Wan Xianyang was good, but Shi Mengwan didn't like him, so there was nothing she could do. Xianyang, listen to my advice. You'd better find another target. Wan Xianyang didn't give up and said it casually. In fact, he had long given up. Hearing Su Qingsang say this, he wasn't angry. Okay, I want to see who subdued this flower in the end. Shi Mengwan actually knew that Wan Xianyang wouldn't do anything, but facing someone who had once, passionately, pursued her, she always felt a little uncomfortable. In fact, she believed that Li Junxing might not have deep feelings for her. It was just the desire to conquer, just like that person. Shi Mengwan, who was a little absent-minded, walked a little faster. She didn't notice that someone happened to turn around in front of her and happened to come towards her. She accidentally fell into the other party's arms. Sorry. Shi Mengwan quickly apologized and wanted to leave his embrace. She was wearing high heels today, so she accidentally tripped over her left foot with her right foot. Not only did she lose her footing, but she also fell into his embrace. Shi Mengwan had never encountered such an embarrassing situation. She almost didn't dare to raise her head. However, he heard a low chuckle from above his head. Then, his body was supported by someone, and he stood firm. Using this movement, she raised her head and realized that the person in front of her was very familiar, as if she had seen him somewhere before. I'm sorry. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and felt a little embarrassed. It's okay. Li Junxing shook his head. Today was the first month of Su Qingsang and Hui Jiniao's child. He had just flown over from Lin City today. He didn't expect to encounter such a romantic encounter as soon as he arrived. I'm so sorry. Shi Mengwan knew that the people who came today were either rich or powerful. They were all business friends of the Hui family. Therefore, he was indeed a little embarrassed. It really doesn't matter. Li Junxing smiled and took a step back. He looked at Shi Mengwan with a flash of amazement in his eyes. Speaking of which, he had never seen Shi Mengwan before. When he was in Lin City, it was unlikely that Hui Jiniao would invite Shi Mengwan to a gathering with them. When Shi Mengwan came to Rong City to play and was brought to play with Hui Jiniao's group of childhood friends, Li Junxing was in Lin City. Therefore, Su Qingsang and Hui Jiniao had been married for more than a year, but Li Junxing had never seen Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan didn't wear a formal dress when she came over today, but she was very formal. She wore a classic Hepburn black dress with a red suit jacket on the outside. Red and black were matched by her, and there was a hint of passion in her cold elegance. It was a very suitable color scheme, and Shi Mengwan had put on light makeup today. Her facial features were already very bright and beautiful. Looking at her like this, she looked even more interesting. If one looked closely, they could see the faint worry in Shi Mengwan's eyes. He gave off a contradictory feeling, yet surprisingly harmonious feeling. Shi Mengwan wanted to laugh. She rarely made stupid mistakes like today. It was really the first time. Are you also here to attend the full moon banquet? She looked at Li Junxing and felt that he looked a little familiar. After asking this question, her eyes suddenly widened as if she had remembered something. Yes. Li Junxing looked at Shi Mengwan. He had never seen her before. You too? Yes. Shi Mengwan nodded. The moment Li Junxing nodded, she completely remembered who he was. You're Mayor Li. You know me. Li Junxing listened to Shi Mengwan and tilted his head. You're from Lin City. Yes. Shi Mengwan was really a little excited now. Although she knew that the Hu family knew people who weren't ordinary, and she had also seen some people who often appeared on TV just now, she was surprised to see them here. But Li Junxing was different. He was the mayor of Lin City. She was a small citizen, and it was her first time meeting the mayor. This made her a little excited. Hello, Mayor Li, this isn't Lin City. You don't have to be so polite to me. Li Junxing looked at Shi Mengwan. Are you Hu Jinyao's friend? Or a relative? Since he called Hu Jinyao by his name, it meant that Li Junxing had a good relationship with Hu Jinyao. Shi Mengwan also relaxed a little. I'm Su Qingsang's friend. Li Junxing knew that Su Qingsang was from Lin City. He didn't ask any more questions. I see. Then please help yourself. I'll go in and greet the old master first. Okay. Shi Mengwan waited until Li Junxing's figure disappeared before she recovered from the shock. She didn't expect that she would have the chance to meet the mayor of Lin City. This feeling was really subtle. She walked towards the bathroom at the other end of the corridor. At the corner, there was the men's bathroom outside, and the women's bathroom opposite. Before she could go in, her hand was grabbed by someone. Before she could react, she was pulled into the men's bathroom. Shi Mengwan was shocked. Her first reaction was that she had met a pervert. Her second reaction was that this was a 5-star hotel. All the people who came today were famous people, so it shouldn't be. Her guess was quickly confirmed. A familiar smell came to her nose. She was very familiar with this smell after a year. She suddenly raised her head, but what she saw was Zhang Hao's sinister face. She didn't have time to care about his ugly expression. Instead, she immediately realized the situation in front of her. Are you crazy? This is the men's bathroom. She was extremely panicked. She wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, but Zhang Hao blocked her lips in the next second. It was as if she had been bitten by a piranha. She only felt pain on her lips. She couldn't escape, she couldn't leave. Her entire body was tightly trapped by him. This was a 5-star hotel. There were constantly people coming and going outside. This was still the men's bathroom. Zhang Hao's attitude made Shi Mengwan think that she was a prostitute for a moment. She struggled up, raised her hand, and was about to swing it at Zhang Hao's face. Zhang Hao's reaction was faster than she thought. He quickly grabbed her hand and used force to restrain her hands behind her back. Because of her resistance, the force on his lips became heavier. Shi Mengwan's lips were bitten by him until they hurt. She wanted to retreat, but John House's strength wasn't something she could compare to. Woo-woo. She glared at him. Her eyes were filled with resistance, dissatisfaction, and anger. John House met her gaze for a long time. Finally, he let go of his hand and retreated a little, but he still trapped her in his arms. Shi Mingwan's breathing was a little breathless. Her lips hurt. She suspected that he had bitten her lips. John House. Let go of me. She wanted to push him away and leave this place. If she saw her in the men's bathroom, even if she didn't do anything, even if no one here knew her, it would be enough to make her feel embarrassed. Wan Xianyang, Hua Jiniao's childhood friend. The second young master of the Wan family. Now, he runs 2 antique shops. Among them, Gulangshuan's business is the biggest. Every year, it brings Wan Xianyang hundreds of millions of yuan in profits. Shi Mingwan's body froze. She didn't understand what John House meant by this. Li Junxing, the mayor of Lin City. His family has been in the right place for generations. Li Junxing is young, but he's already the top leader of Lin City. In the past year, through the investment of a master, he's developed and renovated the old city area of Lin City. He's very popular in Lin City. Shi Mingwan's back was tightly pressed against the door. She didn't understand what he meant. I didn't expect you to be so good at seducing men. You're actually able to attract the favor of 2 men like this in one go. Shi Mingwan watched as he said such words in such a mocking tone. Without thinking, she raised her hand and slapped him in the face. However, before her hand could touch his face, he had already grabbed it. He leaned forward and pinned her between the door and his chest. Are you angry? John House, not every man is like you. Like me? What do you mean? John House leaned over and got close to Shi Mingwan's face. His breath pointed at her cheek. She turned her face away as if she was avoiding him, bit her lip, and pinched the nails of her hand that he didn't grab into her palm. What? She didn't understand how things had turned out like this. More than a year ago. Shi Mingwan hung up on Su Qingsang. She felt a little lonely. Su Qingsang followed Hua Jiniao back to Rong City for the Mid-Autumn Festival. She was married. Although she didn't forget her friends because of love, she really didn't have much time to see Su Qingsang. She felt a little lonely, but Hua Jiniao seemed to be a good person. Although he had no money, he still lived in Su Qingsang's house. The conditions were also ordinary. But as long as he treated Su Qingsang well, it was fine. She looked through all the orders she had received before. Recently, the studio's business had been good. Ever since Su Qingsang got married, her orders had increased a lot. Even though Su Qingsang was the illegitimate daughter of the Su family, her wedding was still quite eye-catching. She designed her wedding dress herself. After the wedding, the studio's business had improved a lot. Sister Shi, the customer from last time is here again. After knocking on the door, the secretary, Xiao Qiu, poked his head in. Which one? It's that Miss Qin. I'll go take a look. When Shi Mingwan heard the surname Qin, she immediately thought of a person. There were 2 people sitting in the reception room. One was Chen Feifei, whom she had met last time, and the other was John House. Seeing the 2 of them appear at the same time, Shi Mingwan's expression changed for a moment. It was only for a moment. She quickly composed herself and turned to look at Chen Feifei. Hello, Miss Chen. Last time, Chen Feifei came over and said that she wanted to order a dress, but after saying the design requirements, she didn't say anything else. Hello. Chen Feifei was gentle and weak. When she saw Shi Mingwan, she stood up rather politely. Miss Shi, I might have to trouble you this time. I have a banquet in a few days, and I want to choose a dress for myself. Although Shi Mengwan mainly designed wedding dresses, she also had dresses here. Looking at Qin Feifei, she nodded. No problem. May I know what Miss Chen's request is? White. And be more generous. Qin Feifei smiled quite appropriately. Why don't you introduce it to me, Miss Shi? Okay. Shi Mengwan nodded and brought Qin Feifei to try on the dress. Before leaving, she glanced at Zhang Haoze. He sat there with his legs elegantly crossed. He was holding a magazine in his hand and casually flipping through it. Qin Feifei had already walked to the door, but she suddenly turned around and walked in front of Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, I'm going to try on the clothes. Wait for me. Okay, Zhang Haoze replied. His gaze didn't even leave the magazine. Qin Feifei seemed a little dissatisfied. She couldn't help but bend down and kiss Zhang Haoze on the cheek. Thank you, Brother Hao. You're so nice to me. Shi Mengwan maintained a straight face and didn't look in that direction. Therefore, she didn't see that Zhang Haoze's brows were slightly furrowed because of Qin Feifei's actions. Qin Feifei also knew that she couldn't go too far. If she went any further, Zhang Haoze would be unhappy. She couldn't help but feel a little depressed, but she hid it very well. Shi Mengwan brought Qin Feifei to try on the clothes. Along the way, her mind couldn't help but think of Zhang Haoze. He had changed a lot now, but no matter how much he changed, she could still recognize him. Lowering her eyes, Shi Mengwan forced herself to retract her thoughts and focus on Qin Feifei. This is our dress exhibition area. Other than our own designs, there are also some custom-made clothes from abroad. As a studio, of course, they had to try their best to meet the needs of people at different levels. This one isn't bad. Qin Feifei picked up a white dress and compared it to herself. Miss Chen, you can go and try it on. Shi Mengwan looked at Qin Feifei's figure. Miss Chen is so slim. You should wear size S, right? Yes. Qin Feifei nodded, but she placed the dress in Shi Mengwan's hand. I'm sorry, but I don't think I like the lace on it. It's okay. You can take your time to look at it. Okay. Qin Feifei nodded and turned to look at her as if she had thought of something. Miss Shi, your studio is called Song Seeking. What's the name? Shi Mengwan pursed her lips slightly. Life is like a dream and a song, so it's called Song Seeking. I didn't know that Miss Shi was such an elegant person. Miss Chen, you're too polite. Shi Mengwan stood behind her, but she knew very well that this name didn't mean that. Song Seeking. Looking for dear brother. But for so many years, so long, there was no news of her at all. It wasn't easy for her to see him, but her dear brother had completely forgotten about her. These two. As they spoke, Qin Feifei had already picked out 2 dresses. Shi Mengwan led her to the fitting room. When she turned around, she realized that Zhang Haoze had arrived at some point in time and was standing at the entrance of the exhibition area. Her assistant, Xiao Ji, accompanied Qin Feifei to try on the clothes. At this time, there were only Shi Mengwan and Zhang Haoze in the exhibition area. The visitor was a guest. Shi Mengwan tried her best to make her expression look normal and calm. Mr. Zhang, Miss Chen should be out in a while. You can sit here and wait for her. Zhang Haoze glanced at her, then slowly walked to the sofa that Shi Mengwan pointed at and sat down. This exhibition area was designed to have a very fashionable feel. There were dark patterns on the large pieces of light pink and white. They were all kinds of clothing styles. If one looked closely, they could see the patterns on them. The sofa was geometric. It didn't surround the coffee table in the middle like normal shops. Instead, there were small tables on both sides with catalogs on them. There was also a small vase with a thin neck with a rose in it. Jean Hauser looked around and stopped when he passed by Shi Mingwan's face. He couldn't tell that this woman had good taste. Shi Mingwan called out. Soon, Xiao Qiu brought in 2 cups of camellia tea. Mr. Jean, please have some tea. Brother Hao, do I look good? Chen Feifei had already put on her clothes and came out. When she saw Jean Hauser come in, she was obviously very happy and turned around in front of him. Jean Hauser didn't comment. Not bad. Just not bad. Chen Feifei was obviously disappointed, but only for a moment. Then I'll go change again. Jean Hauser didn't say anything. Chen Feifei seemed to be a little sullen. She went in to change into another set of clothes. She changed into the second set, and Jean Hauser still said it wasn't bad. Shi Mingwan stood there with her eyes focused on her nose and her nose focused on her heart. Chen Feifei didn't ask her, and she didn't intend to ask. In fact, both sets were not bad and suited her very well. Chen Feifei changed to the third set and got Jean Hauser's approval. Then I'll take this set. Chen Feifei finally had a smile on her face. She turned to look at Shi Mingwan. Miss Shi, do you have men's clothes here? Pick a set for Brother Hao too. Yes. Although she only designed women's clothes here, it didn't mean that she didn't have men's clothes. There were foreign high-end custom-made clothes, and there were also collaborations with some brands. Brother Hao, you can pick one here too. Jean Hauser sat still. I have clothes. Then just treat it as accompanying me. You won't wear matching clothes with me when we go to a banquet, right? When she said the words matching clothes, she seemed a little embarrassed. She looked at Jean Hauser tentatively again. Jean Hauser glanced at her and finally got up to pick out clothes. Miss Shi, help me pick out a set. This was the first time Jean Hauser spoke to Shi Mingwan since he came here. Shi Mingwan looked at him and finally picked out a set of clothes for him that she felt were very suitable and matched the one Chen Feifei was wearing just now. This set. Put it together with the one Feifei wore just now. It wasn't that Shi Mingwan hadn't met straightforward customers before, but there weren't many such straightforward customers. She took the card from Jean Hauser's hand and asked Xiao Qiu to swipe the card for Jean Hauser. Chen Feifei was obviously very satisfied with Jean Hauser's cooperation. The smile on her face became a little more sincere. Brother Hao, you're so good to me. However, you still have to try it. If it doesn't fit, can't you ask her to change it? Although I believe you look good in anything. But still, try it. As she spoke, she held Jean Hauser's arm. Jean Hauser's body stiffened for a moment, but it was only for a moment. Then I'll go try it on. With the excuse of going to try on the clothes, he successfully broke free from Chen Feifei's hand and went to try on the clothes. The dark suit, the close-fitting cut, and Jean Hauser's standard inverted triangular figure. This suit suited him very well. Brother Hao is so handsome. Chen Feifei's eyes were filled with undisguised admiration. When she was about to approach, Jean Hauser entered the fitting room again and changed his clothes. Is it okay? It's okay. Shi Mingwan had already asked Xiao Qiu to wrap up the clothes. May I ask if you want to take them away or send them to your door? We'll take them away directly. Chen Feifei hooked her hand around Jean Hauser's wrist. Brother Hao, it's getting late. Let's go to the bacon restaurant for dinner. I heard that there's a new chef there. He's very good at cooking Cantonese cuisine. Let's go and have a try. Jean Hauser didn't say anything and left directly. Shi Mingwan watched the two of them leave, and her mind couldn't help but think of that year. She watched helplessly as her dear brother got further and further away from her. She shook her head and reminded herself in her heart that Jean Hauser was no longer her dear brother. She asked Xiao Qiu to pack up the clothes. Shi Mengwan planned to go back to her office and finish the design drawing that she had received earlier. However, just as she sat down, Xiao Qiu came in again. Sister Shi, I picked this up from the article just now. It was a man's wallet. The black leather was very textured, and it could be seen that it was very valuable. This should be Mr. Zhang's. Just leave it. Contact him according to the phone number left by the client later. Okay. Xiao Qiu took the wallet and was about to leave. Shi Mengwan suddenly called out to him, wait a minute. Just leave it. It's almost time to get off work. I'll call him to inform him. You guys can get off work when it's time. Xiao Qiu didn't think too much about it. Shi Mengwan stayed in the office alone all year round to draw until late. She had a lounge upstairs. If it was late, she would sleep in the studio. Since she said that she would inform the other party, she put down the wallet and left. Shi Mengwan picked up the pen and was about to continue drawing, but when she saw the wallet, she couldn't help but reach out to take it. However, just as she picked it up, she forced herself to put it down again. In her heart, she had already accepted that that man wasn't her dear brother, so why should she look at his things? He returned his attention back to his drawing, and before he knew it, 3 hours had passed. When she finished drawing, she realized that the night sky had darkened. It was already very late. No wonder she was so hungry. She wanted to eat something to fill her stomach. However, her gaze landed on the wallet again. Chapter 649. Shi Mengwan hesitated for a while, then opened it. Other than a few cards and a stack of cash, there was no other identification. Shi Mengwan was about to close the wallet when she saw that the place where the photo was supposed to be was white. It seemed to be the back of the photo. A strange thought flashed through his mind. What kind of situation was this? Why didn't they show the front of the photo? She looked at the back of the photo and felt that she could see a secret. Out of politeness, she should put down her wallet and contact John Hauser to get it. But she really wanted to know whose photo was in his wallet. She reached for the photo and was about to pull it out. Miss Shi's manners seemed to be lacking. Didn't anyone tell you not to touch other people's things? The sudden voice at the door shocked her so much that she almost threw the purse in her hand. Although he didn't throw it out, it was close enough. Her purse fell on the table with a thud. She looked at the tall figure at the door and felt guilty. Mr. Jean. Jean Hauser stood at the door, expressionless. His thin lips were pressed into a straight line. His slender legs were now striding inside. With every step she took, Shi Mengwan felt as if the other party's footsteps were stepping on her heart. She tried to stand up, but found that her body was very weak. There was no strength in his legs at all. She could only press her back against the back of the chair she was sitting on. She wasn't a timid person, but she didn't have the confidence to be caught red-handed doing such a bad thing. Jean Hauser had already walked to the desk. He walked around the desk and stood in front of Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan blinked and tried her best to remain calm. Mr. Jean, my staff found this wallet. It is now returned to its rightful owner. She placed the wallet in front of Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser didn't take it. Instead, he bent down and looked at her. His gaze was too sharp. Even Shi Mengwan, who had seen many celebrities, felt a little scared when she was stared at like this. Mr. Jean, you're not going to play the game of mistaken identity anymore. What does that mean? Shi Mengwan blinked and took a few seconds to understand what he meant. Her face was a little red. She couldn't tell if she had mistaken him for someone else. Mr. Jean, if there's nothing else, we're already off work. She lowered her eyes, feeling an indescribable sadness in her heart. That year was deeply engraved in her heart, leaving an unerasable mark. But the person who had left such a heavy stroke in her life didn't remember anything between them. Shi Mingwan's rationality returned. She remembered that the man in front of her was no longer her dear brother. Now, he was Jean Hauser, another woman's boyfriend. She stood up and casually tidied up the things on the table. Just as he was about to leave, he realized that Jean Hauser was standing there without moving. She was about to reach for her bag when she paused. She thought about it, picked up the wallet again and handed it to Jean Hauser. Mr. Jean. Jean Hauser stared at her face for a long time, then reached out and took the wallet. The moment he took the purse away, his fingertips brushed against the back of her hand. His hands were a little cold. It was already past the Mid-Autumn Festival. Lin City was very hot during the day, but it was a little cold at night. However, she still felt that his hands were a little too cold. The moment he retracted his hand, he met Jean Hauser's gaze. He was still staring at her. His eyes were long and narrow, and his gaze was sharp. The bridge of his nose was high, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. Shi Mengwan stared at his lips and suddenly had an urge to lean forward and kiss his thin lips. His lips were as cold as his hands, or were they warm? Realizing what she was thinking, Shi Mengwan's face slowly turned a little red. She had never been in love before, and such a secret thought made her feel a little ashamed. Mr. Jean. Jean Hauser stared at her face and finally retracted his hand. He wrapped the money up. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief. The atmosphere was too awkward for a man and a woman to be alone in the same room. However, Shi Mengwan quickly realized that she was happy too early. Her studio was on the third floor of an office building in a pretty good area in Lin City. There was a corridor that wasn't long from the studio, and then there was the elevator. When the two of them walked to the elevator together, Shi Mengwan realized that she was going to take the elevator with Jean Hauser. Realizing this, she took 2 steps back. Jean Hauser happened to press the elevator button at this moment. When he saw her actions, he turned around and glanced at her. Ah. Mr. Jean, you go first. I seem to have forgotten to lock the door. As she spoke, she took another step back. The elevator arrived at this moment, and Jean Hauser stood there without moving. You locked it just now. Ha. When I came out, you locked it. Was that so? Shi Mengwan felt inexplicably awkward. The elevator opened, and Jean Hauser stood there looking at her. She had no choice but to grit her teeth and quickly walk into the elevator. Jean Hauser looked at her back and followed her into the elevator. The door closed, and only the two of them were left in the narrow space. Shi Mengwan had never been like this before. The short 3 floors made her feel like a year. Jean Hauser was standing less than 50 centimeters away from her. She could even smell the scent on his body. It was faint, similar to the scent of mint. The last time she thought he was her dear brother, she smelled the same scent. She moved to the side without a trace, putting some distance between the two of them. When she looked up, she realized that Jean Hauser was staring at her face. Her moving footsteps were frozen there. Her face was a little hot. Such an abnormal person wasn't like her usual self at all. The elevator didn't move. She couldn't help but look up at the elevator and realize that they had actually stopped on the 3rd floor. She was stunned for a moment. She didn't understand why Jean Hauser didn't press the floor button. She looked at Jean Hauser, and he was also looking at her. Shi Mengwan felt uncomfortable being stared at by him. She didn't understand what he wanted to do. She didn't want to stay in such a confined space with Jean Hauser, so she could only choose to press the one. The moment her hand was about to touch the button, Shi Mengwan realized that when she leaned close to the button, she was also close to Jean Hauser. Her arm brushed past his body, and her shoulder was very close to him. Such a close distance made Shi Mengwan momentarily lose her composure. She subconsciously looked at John Hause and found that he was also looking at her. His deep gaze was deep. She couldn't see the meaning in his gaze, but she instinctively murmured those 3 words. Dear brother. John House's gaze suddenly changed and became a little more gloomy. Shi Mengwan was shocked by the sudden change in his gaze and subconsciously wanted to retreat. However, she forgot that she was leaning forward at this moment. With this retreat, her entire body lost balance. She subconsciously wanted to grab something, but there was nothing else in front of her other than John Hause. In a flash, Shi Mengwan gave up and let her body move forward. She wanted to use her hands to stabilize herself. A big hand appeared on her waist. John House's hand was placed on her waist. Her body was half suspended and pressed against his body. Her hands were forward, and her entire body was in a strange posture. Shi Mengwan was embarrassed again. She was in a rather sorry state. She used both her hands and feet to try to leave John House's body. However, in her panic, her hand hit his face instead. She didn't really hit him, but brushed past his face. She was shocked and quickly retracted her hand. As a result, her upper body couldn't exert any strength, and she leaned completely on John House's body. Throwing yourself into my arms. Shi Mengwan's face was very red. She mumbled and wanted to explain herself, but John Hause easily scooped her body up at this moment and pressed her against the elevator wall. John, first, you mistook me for someone else, and then you threw yourself into my arms. Miss Shi, do you always treat your clients like this? His almost humiliating words made Shi Mengwan's face instantly turn as pale as blood. She wanted to push John Hause away, but she realized that his body was as immovable as a mountain. Mr. Jean, please let go of me. You're not calling me dear brother anymore. John Hause stared at Shi Mengwan's red face because of embarrassment and shyness. His slender and slightly cold fingers gently caressed her cheeks. Shi Mengwan's body instinctively trembled. She looked above John Hause. Mr. Jean, please let go. There were cameras in the elevator, and she really had no intention of becoming the news person of the entire building tomorrow. John Hause stared at her face and didn't retreat. Instead, he put his hand past her side. Shi Mengwan became more and more nervous. At this moment, John Hause pressed the button for the first floor. The moment he retracted his hand, he approached her. Their faces were less than 5 centimeters apart. He stared into her eyes. Shi Mengwan had a pair of extremely beautiful almond-shaped eyes, and the corners of her eyes were slightly raised. She looked seductive. Especially when her red lips were slightly opened, as if she was kissing him seductively. John House's eyes darkened slightly, and his tone was even colder than before. If you don't want a man to have sex with you in the elevator, don't make such a seductive move next time. The redness on Shi Mengwan's face disappeared completely. The elevator had already reached the first floor. John Hause let go of his hand and took a step back. Without looking at Shi Mengwan, he stepped out of the elevator and left. If it weren't for her last bit of willpower, Shi Mengwan would have slid to the ground. She had never been humiliated like this in her life. Seduction. He really dared to say it. If it weren't for the fact that he was the dear brother that she had always missed. If it weren't for the fact that she always had different feelings for him. How could she let herself lose her composure like this? Seeing that the elevator was about to close again, Shi Mengwan grabbed the bag on her shoulder and quickly stepped out of the elevator. The night wind blew, and it was a little cold. It also allowed her to completely calm down. Some people were no longer the people they used to be. She didn't need to care. She didn't need to care. She just needed to pretend that that person wasn't her dear brother. She just needed to find her dear brother again. Su Qingsang didn't stay in Rome City for long. She only stayed for a week before coming back. Every time she went out, she would bring a gift for herself. This time was no exception. Shi Mengwan had something on her mind. But she couldn't let Su Qingsang see it. She used her laughter to distract Su Qingsang's attention. She didn't realize that there was something wrong with her. After all, he was the dear brother that she missed so much. Shi Mengwan couldn't stand him talking to her like that. Fortunately, she was used to adjusting her mood. Within 2 days, she let herself put this matter aside. Chen Feifei came again later, but she came with a friend of hers. Not seeing Zhang Haoze, Shi Mengwan couldn't tell whether she was disappointed or relieved. Half a month had passed. That day, Su Qingsang rarely had time and said that she wanted to treat her to a meal. The two sisters hadn't had a gathering for a long time. Shi Mengwan went and found that Hu Jinyao was also there. At first, she was a little uncomfortable, but now she was completely used to it. With Hu Jinyao and Su Qingsang at the scene, it wouldn't be called showing off. It was called dog butcher. The two of them had to show off their love during a meal, which made her a little speechless. After a few teasing words, she felt a little stifled. They didn't even talk about dating and jumped straight to marriage. They were also doing very well now. Maybe she really had to listen to Su Qingsang's suggestion and forget her dear brother and find a man. Maybe he could be like Su Qingsang and Hu Jinyao. Although she thought so, she clearly knew that it was unlikely. After separating from Su Qingsang, Shi Mengwan wasn't in a hurry to go home. Feeling a little annoyed, she unconsciously drove the car to the entrance of a small alley. The alley was very dark, and only the intersection had a faint light. Shi Mengwan didn't feel afraid. She stared at the small alley. She could almost imagine what kind of scene it would be like if she were to pass through this alley. It had been more than 10 years. Many places in Lin City had changed, but this place hadn't changed until now. Passing through the entrance of the alley, there were small alleys on both sides. They were of different sizes, and there were many people living there. Almost all the people at the bottom of Lin City society lived here. She looked at the hidden darkness behind the intersection and got out of the car. She was very bold today. In fact, she used to come to this place often. She wasn't afraid of encountering danger. Although the people here weren't very friendly, there really weren't any bad people. There was a breakfast stall at the outermost part of the alley. It was closed now. Further inside, there was a small shop. It was also closed today. She still remembered that she was very hungry at that time. She wanted to eat, but she didn't have any money on her. What happened after that? Dear brother found a steamed bun and opened it, half for each of them. He said that it was half for each of them, but in fact, her half was more, and his half was less. She said, "Dear brother, you're bigger. Do you eat this big piece?" "No need. I'm a man. I can withstand hunger better. You eat." A teenager wasn't a man at all, but Shi Mengwan felt that the young man was an indomitable man. He was so thin and young, but he raised her for a year, a whole year. At that time, she was eating the steamed bun and watching dear brother finish the small half of the steamed bun in a few bites. She knew that dear brother wasn't full. She deliberately left half of it, saying that she didn't have an appetite today and couldn't eat anymore. Before dear brother could react, she put the steamed bun into his mouth. At that time, how did dear brother react? Shi Mengwan's memories were interrupted. She heard a voice coming from the fork in the alley not far ahead. It was getting late, and Shi Mengwan didn't intend to cause trouble. She turned around and wanted to leave, but she heard a voice that wasn't unfamiliar to her. "Cut the crap. Do you want to come one by one, or do you want to come at me together?" This voice was clearly Jean House's. Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment. Not only did she not leave, but she also walked closer. Very arrogant. Since that's the case, let's teach him a lesson. A sharp male voice sounded. Shi Mengwan quickly heard muffled groans and the sound of fighting. She could tell that there were quite a few people on the other side. Using the dim street lamp at the entrance of the alley, she approached very carefully. Using a telephone pole as cover, she carefully poked her head out. She saw a group of people fighting. No, it wasn't right to say that it was a group of people fighting. It should be a group of people fighting around a person. The person who was surrounded was naturally Jean House. When she saw that face clearly under the street lamp, Shi Mengwan almost screamed. Why was he here? Also, why were so many people beating him up? Could it be that he got into trouble again? She thought of that year. Dear brother worked very hard every day to support her. Once, when he was about to come back, he was stopped at the entrance of the alley by two youths who looked taller and stronger than dear brother. The other party wanted dear brother to hand over all his money. How could dear brother be willing? In order to protect the money that he had earned with great difficulty, he refused to hand it over. In the end, he was beaten up by the two of them. At that time, it was also like now, two people beating him up. Back then, Jean House might not have had the ability, but now, he should be different, right? He was someone who was going to marry Qin Feifei. How could such a person provoke these people from the underworld? Shi Mengwan's mind was running wild. However, her eyes were filled with worry. She wondered if she should call the police now and ask them to come. Or should she think of a way to lure those people away? However, before Shi Mengwan could do anything, she saw the situation in front of her clearly. She, who had been letting her imagination run wild just now, didn't notice that Jean House had already beaten that group of people to the ground. Jean House was still standing. He was a little far away, so she couldn't tell if he was injured. However, she was stunned to see that the people who had just attacked him were all lying on the ground. There were cries of pain in the alley. It could be seen that they were all seriously injured. Such a change shocked Shi Mengwan. When did dear brother's skills become so good? Tell your master that no matter what he wants to do, I'm here and will accompany him at any time. One of the people lying on the ground said for a long time, but he didn't come up with anything new. Over and over again, it was just a few threatening words. Shi Mengwan saw that Jean House was fine and was about to leave, but Jean House had already started to walk in this direction. Shi Mengwan was shocked. Before she could think of where to hide, Jean House had already walked to her side. When he passed by her, he glanced at her and then stopped in his tracks. He looked at her and saw that half of her body was hidden behind the telephone pole, but it was completely useless. She was still clearly seen by others. Have you heard enough? Shi Mengwan was shocked. She didn't expect that she would be discovered by him. She had nowhere to hide even if she wanted to. She looked at the person behind her who was still lying on the ground in pain. Shi Mengwan took a big step back. She didn't know what was under her feet, but she almost stepped on it. However, this time, she balanced her body well and didn't let herself fall again. What a coincidence. Mr. Jean. Jean House ignored her greeting. He looked at the people at the other end of the alley and finally, his gaze fell on Shi Mengwan. Chapter 650. Jean House narrowed his eyes slightly. His voice wasn't loud, but the coldness that emanated from it once again explained his current emotions. No. Shi Mengwan quickly explained, I didn't follow you. I just happened to pass by. Passing by. Jean House's gaze became sharper. Passing by here. Shi Mengwan was a little embarrassed. Indeed, he wasn't here to pass by. He was only here to reminisce about the past. She couldn't help but glance at John Hauser. What about him? He should be considered a successful person now, right? Why did he appear here? Realizing that she had asked that question out loud, Shi Mingwan's expression became a little more uncomfortable. John Hauser didn't answer her question. He stared at her face and suddenly approached her. Does Miss Shi live nearby? No. Then why is Miss Shi here? His slender legs took a step forward and successfully fixed Shi Mingwan's body between her and the telephone pole. Facing such a predicament again, Shi Mingwan felt a little uncomfortable. She leaned back and didn't try to push him away. She knew the difference in strength between the two of them. Is this your home? This was the second time he had faced such a situation, especially when they had such an unpleasant meeting the last time. Shi Mingwan's tone wasn't very polite. She had always been a woman with a sharp edge. It was only because he was her big brother that she had been enduring in front of him. If this place isn't yours, then what right do you have to question me like this? Jean Hauser narrowed his eyes slightly because of her sharp retort, and his body suddenly moved closer. He lowered his body and confronted Shi Mingwan. The malice in his eyes made Shi Mingwan's back turn cold, but she refused to admit defeat. Since you can come to this place, I can naturally come as well. Mr. Jean wasn't a police officer. Can you please let go of me now? You want me to leave? The alley was dark, and not far behind him, he could still hear the wailing of the group of people. In front of him was Jean Hauser's body. No matter how he looked at it, the atmosphere was very strange. Shi Mingwan didn't want to stay any longer, so she saw that Jean Hauser didn't plan to move aside. She stooped and tried to escape sideways. Jean Hauser did not move. When she retreated, she touched his arm. He heard an extremely soft, muffled groan. Shi Mingwan, who could have left, suddenly stopped in her tracks. She looked at Jean Hauser, who was standing next to her, and her gaze fell on his arm. She saw the faint blood stains on his elbow. You're hurt. Shi Mingwan suddenly lost her cool. Instinctively, she held his arm. Are you okay? Jean Hauser frowned slightly. He didn't even notice that he was injured. What do you think? Does it hurt? Do you want to go to the hospital? 3 words of concern in a row made Jean Hauser's brows furrow even tighter. Shi Mingwan wasn't short, but she was holding his arm, so he could only see the top of her head. Shall I take you to the hospital? After Shi Mingwan said this, she looked up at him and met his cold expression. Only then did she remember that the man in front of her was no longer her dear brother. Her hand jerked back as if she had been struck by lightning. Annoyed at himself for being a busybody, he turned around to leave. Jean Hauser followed beside her at this moment. After taking a few steps, Shi Mingwan suddenly stopped and looked at him. Didn't you say you were going to take me to the hospital? She did say that, but that was what she thought. Shi Mingwan's footsteps became faster and faster. Jean Hauser's footsteps didn't need to be fast. His steps were much bigger than hers. Shi Mingwan felt the footsteps behind her, and her emotions were very complicated. When he walked to her car and opened the door, Jean Hauser also got into the car. She sat in the driver's seat and looked at Jean Hauser. Mr. Jean said that I seduced you yesterday. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to escape if I pester you? The night was blurry. The dim streetlights made her facial features look hazy, and her watery eyes were a little provocative. Drive. Jean Hauser retracted his gaze and didn't look at her again. He leaned back against the back of the chair. Shi Mingwan gritted her teeth and wanted to chase Jean Hauser out of the car. She glanced at his side profile and started the car in the end. Don't go to the hospital. 5 extremely faint words. If it weren't for the silence in the car, Shi Mengwan wouldn't have heard it. She couldn't help but look at him again. She found that Zhang Hao's eyes were half closed and he was leaning against the car seat as if he was about to fall asleep. Shi Mengwan retracted her gaze and stepped on the accelerator. On the way, Shi Mengwan turned around and looked at Zhang Hao. His arm was still bleeding. Her heart trembled slightly. She thought of her dear brother. More than 10 years ago, Shi Mengwan, who was only 12 years old, got lost from her parents. Although she said she got lost, she actually ran away from home. She was from Lin City, but she wasn't from Lin City. She was from a small county town under Lin City. Shi Mengwan's father was the eldest in the family. He had 2 younger brothers. The small county town where Shi Mengwan lived was very patriarchal. Shi Mengwan's 2 uncles both had sons. Only Shi Mengwan didn't. Shi Mengwan's grandmother was very dissatisfied with Shi Mengwan's mother because of this. Shi Mengwan's mother didn't have a good life in the Shi family. Because she had injured her body when giving birth to Shi Mengwan, it wasn't easy for her to get pregnant again. Until Shi Mengwan was 9 years old, she hadn't had a second child. Shi Mengwan's father was the eldest of the 3 brothers of the Shi family, but he didn't have a son. Shi Mengwan's grandmother disliked this eldest daughter-in-law more and more. It wasn't until Shi Mengwan was 11 years old that her mother finally got pregnant miraculously. Shi Mengwan thought that this mother would definitely give birth to a younger brother. This way, her mother's life should be better. But who knew? The second child Shi Mengwan's mother gave birth to was still a daughter. Shi Mengwan's grandmother's expression became even uglier. Even Shi Mengwan's father's heart was heavy. There was clearly a little sister in the family, but no one had a smile on their faces. Shi Mengwan was already sensible. She didn't like the atmosphere at home. She hated how her grandmother scolded her every day and said that her mother was a hen that didn't lay eggs. She hated how her father frowned because she was a daughter. She hated her mother even more. It was clearly not her fault for giving birth to a daughter, but she had to bear all the responsibility on herself. No matter how much she hated that family and the atmosphere at home, she still tried her best to comfort her mother and help her take care of her little sister. She comforted her mother and told her that giving birth to a boy or a girl wasn't something she could decide alone. She didn't need to blame herself or feel guilty. Even if her mother didn't listen at all, she still had to say it. She had learned all of this from her textbooks and had seen it on TV. Also, men and women were already equal now. The teacher had already said so, but her mother still thought so. She was backward and ignorant. Regardless of whether her mother listened or not, she tried her best to maintain the peace and harmony in the family. Until she heard her grandmother persuade her father to send her sister away. She could give birth to another child then. She said that if her mother didn't agree, she would let her father take the second or third uncle's children and adopt them. Shi Mengwan was finally angry. Her little sister was so cute. Even if she was a girl, she was still her father's child. Her father actually wanted to give her sister away. Shi Mengwan, who had been taking care of her sister for a few months and had feelings for her, was furious on the spot. What are you giving her away for? If you want to give her away, just send me away. My sister is still so young. Haven't you thought about what will happen to her in the future if you send her away? Grandma didn't expect her to hear it. She exploded and started to curse. After scolding Shi Mengwan's mother, she started to curse Shi Mengwan. She said that it was all her fault and that she didn't bring her younger brother. Shi Mengwan was furious. If that's the case, then I'll leave this family. I want to see if you can do as you wish without me. Shi Mengwan's father and grandmother both thought that she was saying it out of anger. But Shi Mengwan was serious. She really ran away from home. She took her usual New Year's money and pocket money and directly picked a car from town to the county town. That day, there was still the last bus to Lin City in the county town. Shi Mengwan was really bold. She got on the bus to Lin City just like that. But it wasn't until night fell and the car stopped at Lin City station that she realized what she had done in a moment of impulse. She, a 12-year-old girl, had run away from home just like that. Shi Mengwan, who got out of the car, had a moment of regret. She had never left home in her life. All her knowledge of the world, other than school, was books and television. Holding the little money she had left, Shi Mengwan didn't know where she could go or what she could do. Sister Shushu, who lived next door, said how much money she could earn a year working outside. But she was too young now. At the age of 12, although she was already close to 1.5 meters tall, she was still a child. Moreover, she didn't have a degree. She hadn't even finished junior high school. How could she find a job? She walked along the streets of Lin City Station. The more she walked, the more remote she became. Later, she walked to this area. This was the famous civilian area of Lin City. At that time, although this place wasn't dirty and messy, it definitely wasn't very clean. Shi Mengwan got hungry as she walked. She picked a small shop and bought a piece of bread and a bottle of water to fill her stomach. However, she didn't know that she was being targeted. Although she was only 12 years old, her mother was a famous beauty in the area. Although Father Shi's personality wasn't strong enough with his grandmother, he was also very good-looking. Shi Mengwan perfectly inherited all of her parents' traits. She had almond-shaped eyes, willowy eyebrows, delicate skin, and shiny black hair. The 12-year-old Shi Mengwan could already foresee what kind of beauty she would be when she grew up. What would a lonely and beautiful little girl experience? Shi Mengwan wasn't an idiot. Although she lived in a small county town, the teachers would also give safety education. When she was eating the bread, she realized that someone was staring at her from not far away. At that moment, Shi Mengwan was very flustered. Once again, she began to regret her impulse. But for her to go home now, not only did she have no choice, but she also didn't want to. Her family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. After buying the bus ticket, she didn't have much money left. Even if she wanted to go home now, she didn't have the money to buy a ticket. More importantly, she didn't have a car to go back now. She looked at the two people who looked like hooligans staring at her from afar. She gritted her teeth and entered the small shop again. She took the opportunity to buy another piece of bread and made a bet with herself. She told the shop owner that she was being followed. She asked the lady boss if there was a back door in the shop. She wanted to leave through the back door. Fortunately, the lady boss was a good person. She told Shi Mengwan that there was a small door at the back, beside the bathroom. However, she also told her that after leaving this place, there would be a small alley, which was intricate. It was easy for people who didn't know to get lost here. Shi Mengwan wasn't afraid of getting lost now. It was better if it was intricate. That way, if those two people targeted her, she could think of a way to escape. She had already decided to go to the police station after leaving this place. She would let the police send her home. Granny Guan's expression would be so ugly, and her curses would be so unpleasant to hear. Anyway, she couldn't really do anything to her. At most, she would just beat her up. She left by the back door and got lost in the maze of alleys. It was fine if she got lost, but the most important thing was that any sound would scare her. She was very afraid that those two people would catch up to her and do something to her. It was also at this moment that she heard some extremely chaotic sounds. It was a dark night, the street lights were dim, and the weather was similar to today. She heard a lot of footsteps, and a few of them were very clear. Boss said that it's fine if we don't take his life. Just cripple him. Teach him a good lesson and teach him a lesson. Shi Mengwan had already forgotten that she was also being watched. She walked around the alley and saw that in the alley, a group of people were surrounding a young man and punching and kicking him. Under the dim light, she couldn't see the young man's face clearly. However, the moment the young man raised his head, he met a pair of extremely gloomy and sharp eyes, like those of a wolf in the dark. Shi Mengwan was shocked by that gaze. She heard the young man speak in an unpleasant voice that was unique to the voice-changing period. You'd better kill me. Otherwise, I'll definitely return what you did to me today 10 times, 100 times in the future. Yo, this kid is quite arrogant. The voice from before sounded again. Since that's the case, if I don't show you some power, I'll be letting down my brother Chang's reputation. Brothers, beat him to death. The group of people attacked even more fiercely. Shi Mengwan heard a muffled groan and the sound of fists landing on a person's body. She felt pain just by looking at it. However, the young man refused to beg for mercy. Not only did he refuse to beg for mercy, but he also seized every opportunity to fight back. His eyes were especially bright in the dark night. Shi Mengwan had never seen such a person before. He was clearly beaten to such a state, but he could make himself look calmer and calmer than them. She looked around, but there was no one here. There were too many people, and she was only a little girl. She still had a headache. She didn't know how she could help the other party. It wasn't until she saw the man who spoke pick up a steel pipe and was about to hit the young man's hand. Shi Mengwan didn't even think about it and shouted in a louder voice. Uncle Police, it's over here. There are people fighting over here. As she spoke, she grabbed the stone on the ground and kept hitting it at a trash can beside her. She stomped her feet on the ground with all her might. It felt like there were many people walking at the same time. The man called Brother Chang who was holding the steel pipe froze for a moment and snorted. He threw the steel pipe and kicked the young man. Brat, consider yourself lucky. Brothers, let's go. Shi Mengwan kept stomping her feet and kept hitting the trash can with the stone. The sound became denser and louder. The group of people quickly dispersed. She wasn't in a hurry to go forward. Instead, she waited until the footsteps could no longer be heard and no one appeared. Only then did she carefully poke her head out to see if everyone had really left. However, she met the extremely sinister eyes of the young man just now. That wolf-like gaze stared at her in the darkness. Shi Mengwan was shocked and took a big step back. She, who didn't stand properly, fell to the ground just like that. The bag that she was holding just now fell to the ground. The loaf of bread also fell out of the bag. She didn't dare to pick it up. She just propped herself up with both hands on the ground and stared at the young man in a daze. He looked very disheveled, very disheveled. His nose was bruised and his face was swollen. His body was covered in blood, and his hands were also covered in blood. There was still blood on his clothes. The blood that flowed from the corner of his mouth was especially frightening on a night like this. Shi Mengwan had saved him on impulse just now, but now that she had saved him, she started to feel conflicted again. The person she saved couldn't be a bad person, right? Or, the young man didn't look at her. He bent down and picked up the bread that had fallen to the ground. Shi Mengwan became more and more nervous, but the young man tore off the plastic wrap on the outside of the bread and finished it in a few bites. What kind of operation was this? Shi Mengwan looked at the young man and swallowed her saliva. She wanted to say that he ate her bread. However, the young man also saw the bottle of water in the bag. He glanced at her, took the bottle of water, and drank the remaining half of the bottle just like that. Throwing the bottle on the ground, the young man glanced at Shi Mengwan and turned to leave. However, Shi Mengwan stopped him. Hey! The young man turned around and looked at Shi Mengwan again. Shi Mengwan's lips moved. She wanted to say, "Are you going to leave just like that after eating my food?" However, the words that came out of her mouth were, "You threw the trash on the ground. That's not right." A trace of mockery flashed across the young man's hostile face. He took 2 steps forward and stood in front of Shi Mengwan. She was still sitting on the ground, and the young man was standing there. The young man was nearly 1.7 meters tall. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck. For the first time, she felt afraid. The young man stared at her face. Just when she thought that he would make a move on her, he finally made a move. He bent down. Shi Mengwan was shocked and instinctively covered her head with her hand. The young man picked up the plastic bags and bottles on the ground. Then, after rolling them into a ball, he threw them into the trash can at the side with great accuracy. After throwing them, he glanced at Shi Mengwan, turned around, and continued to walk forward. Shi Mengwan stood up and followed behind him for some reason. After taking a few steps, the young man suddenly turned around and looked at her. Chapter 651. Shi Mengwan was shocked. This time, she stubbornly looked at him. The youth took a step forward and raised his hand, pretending to hit her. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck, but didn't run back. The youth clenched his hand into a fist, then retracted it and continued forward. Shi Mengwan followed behind him. She looked at the youth and didn't know why she wasn't afraid of him at all. "Why did those people hit you?" There was silence. The youth directly ignored her. "You seem to be seriously injured. Do you want to see a doctor?" The youth's footsteps quickened, and Shi Mengwan had no choice but to quicken her footsteps. "Where are your parents? Do they not care about you? Where are you going now? Aren't you afraid that those people will come looking for you again?" "Shut up." The youth finally couldn't take it anymore. He turned around and glared at Shi Mengwan. "Don't follow me." Shi Mengwan bit her lip and followed behind the youth again as he continued to walk forward. The youth walked very fast. He made up his mind to get rid of Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan ran with him. She even thought that it was fortunate that the youth was injured. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to catch up. Yes, the youth's leg seemed to be injured, so he couldn't walk fast. He ran for a long time, but when he realized that he couldn't get rid of Shi Mengwan, he finally gave up. He didn't take another detour. Instead, he walked directly into an extremely small alley at the side. Then, he found one of the doors with familiarity and pushed the door open. Shi Mengwan stood at the door for a long time. Seeing that the youth had no intention of closing the door, she followed him in. The house was very small. She could almost see the entire layout at a glance. There was a small living room with a room inside. On the right was the kitchen and the bathroom. There was nothing else. The living room was very small. There was an extremely shabby cloth sofa. The original color could no longer be seen. The coffee table in front of the sofa was also missing a corner. There was an open medicine box on it. The youth took out bandages and medicine from inside and treated his wound. The most serious part of his injury was on his hand. And with just one hand, he couldn't apply good medicine to himself. Looking at the youth's overly clumsy movements, Shi Mengwan went forward and sat down beside him. She took the medicine from his hand. "Let me help you," she said. "You know how." "I won't." Shi Mengwan shook her head honestly. "However, I've seen the veterinarian near our house bandage the dog's wound." She felt the young man's face darken in an instant. Startled, she retracted her hand that was holding the medicine. "You're cursing me." The youth was not old, but his entire body was filled with a vicious aura. Shi Mengwan had never seen such a person before. She shook her head quickly. The youth didn't say anything else. Shi Mengwan could finally start treating his wounds. She was clumsy. After all, she had never done anything like this before. The youth kept gritting his teeth, as if he was enduring something. After more than half an hour, she finally treated all the wounds on the young man's body. The rest of the youngster's body was covered with superficial wounds. The more serious ones were on his feet and elbows. She finished bandaging the wound and found that it was very ugly. For a moment, she looked a little ashamed. Fortunately, the young man didn't mind. After the young man's wounds were bandaged, he got up and walked to the kitchen. He looked around as if he was looking for something to eat. However, he found that the kitchen was empty. The young man's expression became more and more unsightly. Shi Mengwan seemed to know what he was thinking. Thinking of the scene of him eating bread in big mouthfuls, she looked at him very quietly. "Are you still hungry? Do you want to eat? I'll buy it for you." The young man's sinister gaze fell on her again. Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck. She took out a few bills from her pocket. They were the only ones left after she bought the bus ticket. The young man looked at the money in her hand. This time, he didn't stand on ceremony and took it. "Stay here and don't run around." The young man's voice was changing, so his voice was actually a little unpleasant to hear. Coupled with his vicious face, ordinary people might feel afraid. However, Shi Mengwan didn't feel afraid. Strangely, she always believed that the young man wouldn't hurt her. After the young man left, she took a look at the house and tidied it up. Actually, there was nothing to tidy up. This place was too dilapidated and old. There was nothing at all. However, she was the eldest daughter of the family, so she was used to doing these things. Not long after she tidied up, the young man came back with 2 servings of fried rice noodles in his hands. Later, Shi Mengwan found out that the alley extended in all directions. There were many places to go, and there were many places to sell supper. Although this fried rice noodle stall was just a roadside stall, the taste was very good and it was very cheap. Shi Mengwan had just eaten a piece of bread and a portion of rice noodles. She only ate half of it before she couldn't eat anymore. When she put down her chopsticks, she clearly felt the young man's gaze fall on her, as if he was dissatisfied with her wasting food. Shi Mengwan's appetite wasn't big to begin with. Although she came from a small place, her family had developed well in the past few years, and their family's conditions weren't bad. Speaking of which, she really hadn't suffered much. The young man finished his portion of rice noodles. He silently took the remaining half of Shi Mengwan's portion and finished it as well. Shi Mengwan felt inexplicably embarrassed. The young man didn't seem to notice her situation. After finishing the rice noodles in a few bites, he didn't take a shower and went straight to the bed inside to lie down. Shi Mengwan sat on the small sofa outside, a little at a loss. She wanted to say, "You didn't even brush your teeth and wash your face. Aren't you dirty sleeping like this?" She sat there and waited for a long time. The young man seemed to have really fallen asleep. At this moment, Shi Mengwan stood up and walked to the bathroom with small steps. There was only a cup and a toothbrush there. Shi Mengwan had a slight obsession with cleanliness, so she couldn't do the behavior of using someone else's toothbrush. She could only rinse her mouth with water and wash her face with a handful of water. She cleaned herself up and looked at herself. There were no extra clothes, and she had no money. The remaining dozens of yuan had been given to the young man just now. She felt that she was a little stupid. She should have left a few yuan behind. She didn't know what she was thinking just now. She gave him all the money in a moment of stupor. Now, she didn't have a watch, so she couldn't tell the time. Shi Mengwan, who was sleepy, thought about it for a while. In the end, she curled up her feet on the broken sofa. She fell asleep just like that. Someone knocked on the car window and interrupted Shi Mengwan's memories. Shi Mengwan stopped the car. She realized that the traffic police were checking for drunk driving. She took out her driver's license and blew on it cooperatively. The traffic police glanced at John Hauser, who was sitting next to the car seat. Finally, he waved his hand and signaled for Shi Mengwan to leave. Shi Mengwan's car drove away from the intersection and found that John Hauser was actually awake. Neither of them spoke. Shi Mengwan realized that her apartment was not far ahead. She actually brought John Hauser home without realizing it. Shi Mengwan's apartment was very close to her studio. This location wasn't cheap. Fortunately, the studio's income in the past few years had been good. After she made money in the studio, she borrowed some money from Su Qingsang to buy this small apartment. Although Su Qingsang was an illegitimate daughter, the Su family wasn't stingy when it came to money. She had her own apartment a long time ago, and Su Qinghui gave her pocket money every year. When she knew that Shi Mengwan wanted to buy a house, Su Qingsang was quite generous and lent her all her money. Shi Mengwan had been working hard to draw pictures these few years and paid back the money she owed Su Qingsang. She also saved some money. 2 rooms and 1 living room. Although it was small, it had all the necessary facilities. Although it couldn't compare to the Su family's mansion, it was still bought by her own hands. One of the 2 rooms was used as the master bedroom, and the other was used as a study and design room. When she was inspired, she must have a set of drawing tools in front of her. The living room wasn't big, but there was a large balcony. From here, she could see the landmarks of Lin City in the distance, as well as the large green area under the community. Overall, Shi Mengwan was very satisfied with her own state. She was still young, but she had her own studio, a house, and a car. Shi Mengwan entered the door silently. Instead of greeting John Hauser, she went to the living room cabinet and took out the medicine box. John Hauser stood in the living room, as if he was looking at the environment in front of him. Shi Mengwan glanced at him and sat down on the sofa. John Hauser took a few steps forward and sat down as well. The house was warm-toned and very cozy. The sofa in the corner wasn't big, but it was very comfortable to sit on. Shi Mengwan opened the medicine box, glanced at John Hauser, and motioned for him to take out his hand. He was wearing a light-colored shirt today. The blood was stained on the shirt and had already stuck to the flesh. Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look too good. Everything in front of her was developing in a strange direction. For a moment, she thought that the person in front of her was her dear brother. She even suggested to send him to the hospital, but in the end, she brought this man home. She skillfully cut open the man's sleeve and looked at the wound on it. Fortunately, it wasn't very serious. If he needed stitches, he would really have to go to the hospital. Her movements were very skilled. It was obvious that she had specially practiced it. Speaking of which, could her skills be like this? It was really because she had bandaged her dear brother's wounds too many times. She thought of that unruly youth again. She knew him from the time he was beaten up. After that, he would always fight with others from time to time and get injured from time to time. From the beginning, she was clumsy, but later on, she skillfully treated all kinds of wounds for him. Realizing that she had associated John Hauser with her dear brother again, Shi Mengwan's expression didn't look too good. They weren't the same person, not the same person. She kept reminding herself to keep herself awake. Her movements were very fast, and the wound on John Hauser's hand was quickly bandaged. She looked at John Hauser's face again. The corners of his face were sharp, and his weak-colored skin was smooth and tight. It seemed that his fighting skills had also improved. After all, every time he was beaten in the past, there would be injuries on his face. She was looking at Jean Hauser, and Jean Hauser was also looking at her. He seemed to be able to tell that Shi Mengwan was a little absent-minded. Chapter 652. Shi Mengwan didn't notice Jean Hauser's gaze. Her thoughts were a little adrift. For so many years, she had been searching and searching. At first, he was filled with hope, but later, he felt that his hope was getting slimmer and slimmer. She didn't forget her dear brother, but she kept him in the depths of her heart. She would not easily recall it, otherwise, she would feel very uncomfortable. But ever since she met Jean Hauser, she had been reminiscing about the past more and more. She didn't like it very much. The more she recalled, the more it reminded her that she and dear brother might not be fated to be together. Just like today, she had already regarded Jean Hauser and her dear brother as two different people, but she saw this side of Jean Hauser. For a moment, she was in a trance, as if she had returned to more than 10 years ago. He was the same, always arguing with others, always fighting with others. She could not help thinking of them as one person. It was too similar. Not only her looks, but also, suddenly, an enlarged face appeared in front of him. The malicious eyes that were no different from those in her memory stared at her. Shi Mengwan was startled and took a step back. Behind her was the sofa, and her back touched the back of it. Jean Hauser's body leaned over, and Shi Mengwan gulped. "Mr. Jean, the wound has been bandaged. You can go now." Jean Hauser pursed his lips slightly and looked at the nervousness on Shi Mengwan's face. He stretched his hands forward and placed them on her sides. "Where are you going?" Shi Mengwan blinked. "Where to?" Of course, it was to leave this place. "Mr. Jean, this is my home." "I know this is your home. When you brought a strange man home, didn't you think about the consequences?" Seeing that Jean Hauser's face was getting closer and closer, Shi Mengwan pressed hard against his chest. "Mr. Jean. Sorry for the misunderstanding. She couldn't say the rest of her words. She just thought of him as her dear brother. She just replaced the past memories in front of her. However, the man in front of her did not know her and did not admit that he was her big brother. In short, it's all a misunderstanding. It's getting late, and I still need to rest. Please go ahead." Jean Hauser's body blocked her way. Shi Mengwan didn't move, nor did she escape. She didn't want what happened in the elevator to happen again. "Mr. Jean, can you make way?" Jean Hauser stared at Shi Mengwan's face for a long time, and finally stood up very slowly. Shi Mengwan didn't relax because he stood up. The other party was too tall. She was nearly 1.7 meters tall, and her sitting posture only made the other party look even taller. She didn't know that when her eyes stared at Jean Hauser's face with vigilance, there was an infinite flirtatious look in her eyes. The corners of her eyes were slightly raised, and there was a seductive air about her. But she was completely unaware of her own charms. Jean Hauser stood there, not in a hurry to leave, nor was he in a hurry to move. Shi Mengwan was a little nervous. She gulped. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Jean Hauser's eyes darkened at his eagerness to leave. Not only did he not leave, but he also leaned down. Shi Mengwan felt more and more nervous and leaned back. It was almost a silent invitation. Jean Hauser looked at her half-opened lips and stopped less than a centimeter away from her lips. Breathing hot, Shi Mengwan stared at the enlarged face in front of her and felt inexplicably thirsty. She subconsciously pursed her lips. Jean Hauser's face leaned closer, almost touching hers. "Miss Shi." Jean Hauser's voice sounded a little low. "If you don't intend to let a man do anything to you, Don't casually bring a man home, and don't casually put on such a seductive posture. After saying this, Jean Hausa got up and left. The sound of the door closing brought Shi Mengwan back to her senses from the other party's words. After she came back to her senses, she was filled with anger. What did this Jean Hausa mean? What did he mean by casually bringing someone home? And what did he mean by casually putting on a seductive posture? Shi Mengwan wanted to curse, but the person who could make her curse had already left. She wanted to curse, but she didn't know where to start. Gritting her teeth, Shi Mengwan couldn't suppress her anger no matter what. She told herself that if she still cared about Jean Hausa next time, she would be a pig. She was so angry. When Jean Hausa entered the door, he found that the lights in the hall were shining. Chen Feifei sat on the sofa, and her expression wasn't particularly good. She kept a straight face until Jean Hausa entered the door. Chen Feifei's expression finally looked better. She stood up as if she was flying and quickly pounced in front of Jean Hausa. "Brother Hao, you're back." Chen Feifei's eyes were a little red. When she walked in front of Jean Hausa, she had already cleaned up the expression on her face. When he entered the door, he put on his suit jacket, and the wound on his hand was covered up. Chen Feifei didn't notice that when she pounced on him, she touched his wound. Jean Hausa's brows furrowed imperceptibly. He resisted the urge to pull Chen Feifei's hand away. "It's so late. Why aren't you sleeping yet? You still know that it's so late." Chen Feifei pouted. "It's so late, and you still haven't come back. Don't you know that I'll be worried? Go to sleep." Jean Hausa's voice was considered gentle, but he didn't coax her like before. Chen Feifei was a little unhappy. "Brother Hao, where did you go?" "Nowhere. I'm just working overtime at the company. I must tell Dad not to give you so much work. Look at you, you don't even have time to accompany me. Don't mess around." Jean Hausa's voice was a little serious. "Work is work, not play. If you don't want to say it, then I won't say it." Chen Feifei became more and more unhappy. "But you're always busy. You used to be willing to accompany me, but recently, you've been spending less and less time with me." Her tone was full of complaints. Jean Hausa looked at her, and his expression softened. "I'll accompany you after I'm done with my work." "You said it." Chen Feifei hooked his arm. "Don't lie to me. If you stand me up, I'll tell Dad." "What are you going to tell me?" The sudden voice made the two of them look at the stairs together. Chen Yongchang had come down at some point and looked at the two of them holding hands. "Dad." When Chen Feifei saw her father, she quickly let go of her hand and ran towards Chen Yongchang. "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" "My precious daughter isn't sleeping." "How can I sleep?" Chen Yongchang patted Chen Feifei's hand. "What's wrong? You haven't said what you want to tell me yet. Let me tell you, give Brother Hao less work. Look, he's so busy that he doesn't have time to accompany me." "Really?" Chen Yongchang glanced at Jean Hausa, then looked at Chen Feifei. "You're not young anymore. Don't be too willful. Hausa is someone who wants to do great things. How can he accompany you every day?" "I don't care. I just want Brother Hao to accompany me." It was rare for Chen Feifei to be willful. Her tone was full of coquettishness. Chen Yongchang couldn't do anything about this daughter. Good. But it's getting late now, you should go to sleep." Then Chen Feifei looked at Jean Hausa, wanting him to send her back to her room. "Go to sleep first. I have something to discuss with Hausa." "Got it." Chen Feifei pouted, her face full of unhappiness. "Dad hates it the most. It's not enough for Brother Hao to help you during the day, but at night, you still want to snatch him from me." Fei, Chen Yongchang called her name. Chen Fei was unhappy. She stomped her feet and went upstairs. A grown girl really can't be kept at home. Chen Yongchang looked at his daughter, glanced at Jean Hausa, and walked towards the study. Jean Hausa followed behind him silently. The study was on the first floor. Chen Yongchang entered the door and gestured for Jean Hausa to sit down. He didn't sit down, but stood opposite the desk. It's been so many years, but you're still so polite. Chen Yongchang seemed to be lamenting. Jean Hausa didn't respond, and he didn't need his response. There haven't been many things happening in the company recently. You came back so late today. Is there something wrong? There was a hint of inquiry in Chen Yongchang's eyes. It's nothing big. Jean Hausa's voice was very indifferent. It's just a small matter. I've already taken care of it. I believe you know what to do. Chen Yongchang didn't continue this topic, but changed the topic. That year, Fei saved you and brought you back. It's been more than 10 years now. You know how Fei feels about you. This child has been stubborn since she was young. She has decided on you, and as her father, I can't do anything about it. You're not young anymore. It's time to think about starting a family. Don't you think so? Jean Hausa was silent and didn't respond. The last time Fei was hospitalized, you also promised me that you would marry her. Although her body is better now, she still has to be carefully nurtured. To be honest, I don't feel at ease handing her over to someone else. After so many years, I've seen your character. Hausa, I should be able to trust you, right? Jean Hausa pursed his lips slightly and finally nodded gently. I promised you that I would take care of her. Okay. It's getting late. You should go and rest first. You don't have to go to work tomorrow. Accompany Fei. Jean Hausa didn't refute. He nodded slightly and turned to leave. After returning to his room, Jean Hausa took off his suit jacket. There were still bloodstains on the shirt inside. He took it off and threw it into the trash can. His gaze was a little gloomy as he looked at the bandaged wound. Thinking of Chen Yongchang's words just now, he took out his phone. He pressed a set of numbers from memory. After the call was connected, he only said one sentence, I agree to what you said last time. After hanging up the phone, Jean Hausa deleted the call record. He made 2 more calls. Each time, he only said a few words and deleted the call record. After putting down the phone, he laid down on the bed. His tightly closed eyes covered up all his emotions. Shi Mengwan hung up the phone, but she still couldn't hide the shock in her heart. She had long known that Su Qingsang was the illegitimate daughter of the Su family. However, she didn't expect that Su Qingsang's mother would come knocking on her door one day. This was really amazing. Today, Su Qingsang called to ask her to go to dinner and meet Su Qingsang's mother. Shi Mengwan later met Xiang Kaiping, an auntie who looked quite kind and cute. Shi Mengwan liked her very much. When she saw her, she would think of her mother. Thinking of her mother, Shi Mengwan remembered that during the Mid-Autumn Festival, she was busy drawing and only stayed home for 2 days before returning to Lin City. Later, her mother called, and her words were full of disappointment. Perhaps she should choose a day to go back again. It was winter in Lin City, and the weather slowly turned cold. That day was designer Tong Yan's birthday. After Song Seeking Studio got on track in the 2nd year, Shi Mengwan began to be busy alone. She hired 2 designers, one was Zhou Xinglei, and the other was Tong Yan. The 2 designers were a man and a woman. Neither of them was very experienced, but the design concept was very compatible with her. Tong Yan was 1 year younger than her, and today was her birthday. She didn't have a boyfriend yet, so in the past few years, she had been treating everyone to dinner to celebrate her birthday. At first, because Tong Yen didn't have a boyfriend, Shi Mengwan, as the boss, treated her to dinner to celebrate her birthday. Later, she simply turned the birthdays of the studio staff into a gathering day. When it was time to get off work, Shi Mengwan brought her assistant Xiao Ji, secretary Xiao Qiu, and design assistant Shang Ji into her car. The other design assistant, Qing Jiang, followed Tong Yen into Zhou Xinglei's car. The 7 of them went to Chaoan Courtyard together. In the past, Shi Mengwan didn't spend so much money, but since Su Qingsang got married, Hu Jinyao often gave her all kinds of expense cards. In the past, Su Qingsang foolishly thought that their company had good benefits. Only now did she know that it wasn't good benefits. It was simply President Hu using all kinds of excuses to please his wife. Especially since Hu Jinyao's identity was known in Lin City, there were too many people who wanted to please Hu Jinyao. Many of the membership cards in her hands were given by Su Qingsang. It had to be said that the title of Mrs. Hu was very useful. Shi Mengwan brought her 6 employees into Chaoan Courtyard. The chefs here could cook specialties from all over the country. Although Shi Mengwan was from the south, her taste was heavy and she liked spicy food. She ordered 2 spicy dishes and left the rest to Tong Yen, the birthday girl. Halfway through the meal, Shi Mengwan received a call. She asked Xiao Qiu to take care of them while she went outside to get the cake. Yes. As a good boss, ordering a cake for her employees was also one of her considerate actions. The cake Shi Mengwan ordered was delivered to the hall of Chaoan Courtyard. She took the cake and was about to walk into the private room when she saw Zhan Hao's figure from the corner of her eye. She couldn't help but stop in her tracks. It had been almost a month since she last saw Zhan Hao. During this month, she tried her best not to think of Zhan Hao and that man. She kept hypnotizing herself and telling herself that that man was no longer her dear brother. He was a hooligan, a bastard. He liked to mock her and look down on her. However, she didn't expect to see Zhan Hao again when she was about to succeed. He was standing in the corridor with a woman standing beside him. That woman wasn't Qin Feifei, but someone else. When Shi Mengwan was about to enter the private room, she saw the woman fall into Zhan Hao's arms, and Zhan Hao's arms were around her waist. That scene made Shi Mengwan frown. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. Dear brother could probably only become a shadow in her memory. She turned around and entered her private room without looking back. What she didn't see was that after she left, Zhan Hao's hand had already left the woman's hand. I'm really sorry, President Zhan. Ling Shui steadied herself and slowly removed her hand from Zhan Hao's hand. The heels were too high and I couldn't stand firm. I almost bumped into President Zhan. It's okay. Zhan Hao was expressionless. Your father is still waiting for us in the private room. Miss Ling, please. President Zhan, you actually don't have to be so polite. Ling Shui nodded at Zhan Hao. Speaking of which, I'm about the same as President Zhan. You, Miss Ling, come and go like this. Isn't that too polite? Why don't you call me by my name, Ling Shui? Ling Shui was pretty good looking. She was also very confident in her family background and appearance. At this moment, her gaze at Zhan Hao was naked and direct. She almost said it out loud, I'm interested in you as a man. Zhan Hao's expression didn't change. He took 2 steps forward and opened the door of the private room. Miss Ling, please. Ling Shui took a deep look at Zhan Hao and slowly entered the door. Ling Shui's father was the chairman of a company that worked with the Qin family. Recently, the 2 companies were discussing a cooperation project. Chen Yongchang's health hadn't been good these few days, so he handed this matter to Zhan Hao. Today was the day to sign the contract. Originally, after the contract was signed, it would be over. However, the other party was a business partner after all. Chen Yongchang asked John Hausa to do his part and treat the other party to a meal. The place was set at Chowan Courtyard. John Hausa brought his secretary, Lu Xian, over. And Chairman Ling brought his daughter, Ling Shui. It was inevitable that they would have to drink at the dinner table. John Hausa's alcohol tolerance wasn't bad. This was also the reason why Chen Yongchang was at ease to let him come out to socialize. Lu Xian tried to block it, but John Hausa still had to drink the wine from Chairman Ling. After 3 rounds of drinking, Chairman Ling looked drunk. "Brother Jean, I really admire you. You're so young, but you're so capable. Brother Yongchang is really lucky to have a talent like you. Chairman Ling, you're too polite." Jean Hausa didn't take such praise seriously. There wasn't much pride on his face. Chairman Ling was also someone who had been in the business world for many years. He really admired John Hausa, who didn't show his emotions and strive to be perfect in everything he did. He envied Chen Yongchang's good luck and couldn't help but look at Ling Shui again. "Come, Shui. Let me toast Brother Jean again." Ling Shui picked up her wine glass and toasted John Hausa. "President Jean. President Jean, let me toast you." John Hausa didn't decline. He picked it up and drank. Ling Shui smiled. She glanced at Chairman Ling. "Dad, I've already toasted you. Now it's your turn." "Good, good, good." Chairman Ling raised his wine glass. "Brother Jean, let me toast you. I wish us a happy cooperation." "Happy cooperation." Jean Hausa drank it in one gulp again. Lu Xian wanted to stop him, but he couldn't. Jean Hausa drank a lot. When he was about to leave, Chairman Ling stood up. "Brother Jean, I drank a little too much today. I drank a little too much today. Do you mind letting your secretary send me home?" "I don't mind." Lu Xian didn't drink much today. Jean Hausa called him over so that he could send Chairman Ling and his daughter home after he got drunk. He watched as Chairman Ling left with Lu Xian. Jean Hausa stood up and planned to leave as well. However, the door of the private room was opened again. This time, Ling Shui came in. "President Jean, why aren't you leaving yet?" "Miss Ling. I dropped something. Come up and look for it." As Ling Shui spoke, she started to look for it in her original seat. Jean Hausa wasn't in a hurry to leave out of politeness. "What are you looking for, Miss Ling?" "A necklace." Ling Shui pointed at her neck. "I was wearing it just now. I don't know why it's gone now." Jean Hausa frowned slightly. Just as he was about to say goodbye, Ling Shui raised her head and looked at him. "President Jean, do you mind helping me look for it?" "I don't mind." At this time, Jean Hausa couldn't refuse. He was still working in Chen Yongchang's company, and the person in front of him was still his collaborator. He bent down and helped Ling Shui look for her necklace. The table in the private room was very big, and Ling Shui was beside Jean Hausa. She was wearing a V-neck dress today. When she bent down, Jean Hausa could see the scenery when she lowered her head. He turned his face away without any fluctuation, but Ling Shui exclaimed at this moment. "Here." As she spoke, she reached out her hand in his direction. As the two of them were squatting, Jean Hausa didn't notice and was actually knocked to the ground by Ling Shui's suddenly approaching body. Ling Shui's hand reached behind Jean Hausa. This way, she was almost sticking to Jean Hausa's body. "I'm sorry, President Jean." Ling Shui picked up the necklace. Jean Hausa didn't say anything and waited for her to leave his arms. At this moment, Ling Shui took the opportunity to press on his body and pressed her hands against his chest. President John. How should I thank you for helping me find the necklace? You're welcome. Miss Ling, can you get up first? Ling Shui didn't say anything. She lowered her head and was about to kiss Zhang Hao's lips. Zhang Hao avoided her, and Ling Shui's kiss landed on Zhang Hao's face. Zhang Hao frowned. Just as he was about to push Ling Shui away, he suddenly realized that something was wrong with his body. Hot. He felt the heat coming from little Yufu, and the waves of heat surged down. He suddenly looked at Ling Shui, his gaze sharp and cold like a knife. President John, you're so handsome. She had seen many handsome men, but she liked people like Zhang Hao. He was abstinent, cold, and looked like he was 1,000 miles away. She liked this kind of man, and she liked this kind of style. She couldn't help but want to have a closer relationship with Zhang Hao. Even if she couldn't marry him or be with him, it didn't matter. She only needed a one-night marriage. To her, having such a top-notch man was a bargain. Unfortunately, when they were talking about cooperation, no matter how she hinted, Zhang Hao didn't seem to understand. Helpless, she could only think of another way. Today was the day the two families signed the contract. When she knew that Zhang Hao had arranged a meal, she made an appointment with him in Chaoan Courtyard. Chapter 653. She had seen Chen Feifei before. She was a sickly person. She heard that she had heart disease and looked weak. She hated women like that the most. She felt that they were pretentious and fake. She was an ambitious woman. And Ling Shui never hid her ambition. President John, I've admired you since the first time I saw you. As she spoke, she reached into Zhang Hao's clothes. Even if only a small part of his weak-colored chest was exposed, it was enough to make her imagination run wild. Zhang Hao's breathing became heavier. He finally understood that this woman had added something to the wine he had just drunk. President John. Ling Shui saw his face turn red. She leaned down, pressed her slender hand on his chest, and unbuttoned one of his buttons. I really admire you. I'm very willing to have a chance to communicate with you further. As she spoke, she had already unbuttoned the second button of his shirt. Zhang Hao held her hand at this moment. Ling Shui's eyes widened, but Zhang Hao pushed her away and stood up. His movements were too fast, so fast that Ling Shui didn't have time to stop him. She only said one word before she saw Zhang Hao's face turn red and he took 2 steps back. He looked down at Ling Shui's face. His breathing was a little heavy, but it couldn't hide the coldness in his eyes. I appreciate Miss Ling's good intentions. I'll remember Miss Ling's appreciation for me. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. His voice was a little low and a little hoarse. In fact, the medicine that Ling Shui had given him made his body heat up and he felt very uncomfortable. He used his greatest willpower to suppress the heat in his body. He quickly left the private room. After a short moment of surprise, Ling Shui quickly reacted. She stood up and wanted to chase after Zhang Hao. However, she realized that Zhang Hao could no longer be seen in the corridor outside. She stomped her feet in hatred. She knew that if she missed this opportunity today, she wouldn't have it again. She was angry, but there was nothing she could do. Now, she could only wait for the next chance to come again. After Shi Mengwan sent Tong Yan and the others away, she walked in the direction of her car. She didn't drink. She had always followed the habit of not drinking when driving, and not driving when drinking. Tong Yan and the others said that they were going to karaoke, but she wasn't interested. Although he was easy to talk to, he was still the boss. With her around, Tong Yan and the others would probably feel uncomfortable. She might as well promise them that she would pay for the expenses, but she wouldn't be going. After leaving Chowan Courtyard, Shi Mengwan walked towards her car. It was night time in Chowan Courtyard, and the parking area was a little dark. Passing through the greenery on both sides, the parking space around the corner was hers. However, his body was suddenly pulled into the bushes. The sudden change gave Shi Mengwan a fright. Her first reaction was to struggle, but as her body moved closer to him, she smelled the familiar scent of mint. The light was dim, but she could see clearly. The person in front of him was Jean Hauser. His reddened eyes in the dark, his slightly heavy breathing, and his hand that was tightly wrapped around her waist. "You," she only had time to say the word, "you," before she felt a warm sensation on her lips. What followed was an almost suffocating plunder. He was like a leopard that had bitten its prey. Once it was bitten, it refused to let go. Kiss, fierce. Indulgence. It was as if it wanted to swallow her whole. This was Shi Mengwan's first kiss. She had never been kissed like this before. Or perhaps she had. When she was kissed, her consciousness became a little erratic. She remembered that this couldn't be considered her first kiss. Her first kiss was lost when she was 12 years old. The strength on her lips increased again. She felt pain and raised her foot to kick the other party's crotch. However, she neglected her current position. She was pulled over by the man, and her body was half nestled against his chest. She was pressed into his arms and kissed wantonly. The moment she raised her foot, her body lost balance and she got closer to him. It was like a branch that was entangled by a vine. They were intertwined. There was me in you, and you in me. They couldn't tell each other apart. Shi Mengwan felt her body being hugged by him. She took a step back and leaned against the tree trunk beside her. She wasn't wearing thick clothes, and the cold and hard tree trunk made her feel uncomfortable. She struggled again. Just as the other party's hand was about to reach for the hem of her clothes, she couldn't help but raise her hand and slap the other party's face. She was a little angry, but more so resentful. What did he take her for? The humiliation from before. Today, it was a real bullying. She had just seen him cuddling with a woman, and now he was pestering her again. In the end, he had changed. He was no longer the person she remembered. Or could it be that he had just returned to his true nature, that he had always been a casual person? No matter which one it was, she didn't want to continue. The paw sound was especially clear in the night. The man's movements stopped for a moment. She was carried into the man's arms. The man's chin was pressed against the pit of her neck, and his breathing was heavier than before. Shi Mengwan smelled the smell of alcohol. She tried to push the other party. Strangely, this time, she actually succeeded. After pushing the other party away, she quickly ran to her car. The car door opened twice. She didn't know what she was nervous about. When she got into the car, Shi Mengwan realized that someone was sitting in the front passenger seat. Jean Hauser. His face was abnormally red. His breathing was heavy, and the smell of alcohol was strong. He seemed to be drunk. Shi Mengwan leaned her body towards the car door and stared at Jean Hauser with a face full of vigilance. "Mr. Jean. Drive." Jean Hauser's voice was low and hoarse. He seemed to have seen Ling Shui come out. He didn't want her to see him in Shi Mengwan's car. "President Jean." "I said drive." Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth, stepped on the accelerator for the last time, and quickly left. The moment her car drove away, Ling Shui arrived at the parking lot and looked at Jean Hauser's car, which was still parked there. Jean Hauser hadn't left yet. That made sense. He drank alcohol and was drugged. The alcohol had triggered the drug, so it wouldn't be easy to get rid of it. he should still be in the villa. With this thought, Ling Shui went back to look for Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan stopped the car halfway. She wanted Zhang Haoze to get lost. She wanted to leave her car, but Zhang Haoze didn't look right. His eyes were tightly shut, and he seemed to be very uncomfortable. Shi Mengwan's brows furrowed tightly. President Zhang. Mr. Zhang. Zhang Haoze seemed to have heard her. He opened his eyes and glanced at her. Where's your house? Tell me the address. I'll send you back. The other party was her dear brother, the person she had always cared about and wanted to find. She didn't want to really leave him on the road. Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. Instead, he closed his eyes. Mr. Zhang. Zhang Haoze. Shi Mengwan called out a few more times, but she didn't get a response. Helpless, she could only drive the car back to her home. When the car was parked, Shi Mengwan got out of the car first. She originally wanted to just leave Zhang Haoze here. After thinking about it, she went around and opened the car door. Mr. Zhang. Zhang Haoze didn't move. Shi Mengwan gritted her teeth. Mr. Zhang, can you get out of the car by yourself? Zhang Haoze's eyes seemed to move. Shi Mengwan took a deep breath and bent down to look at him. Mr. Zhang, can you hear me? Zhang Haoze finally reacted. He opened his eyes. Shi Mengwan was shocked by his gaze. His eyes seemed to be even redder than before. Are you okay? Zhang Haoze suddenly reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. She almost went limp, but he got out of the car. Shi Mengwan instinctively supported his body. Most of his weight was on her. He was very heavy, and Shi Mengwan almost couldn't support him. Being so close to him, his body was full of the smell of alcohol, mixed with the faint smell of mint. Shi Mengwan closed the car door and looked up at him. Mr. Zhang, can you stand steadily? Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. However, he almost carried her into the apartment. Shi Mengwan followed him helplessly and brought him upstairs. As soon as they entered, Shi Mengwan threw him on the sofa. During the short journey just now, she was covered in sweat. Zhang Haoze lay on the sofa and didn't move. His face was even redder than before. There was a flash of worry in Shi Mengwan's eyes. But it was only for a moment. Soon, she didn't plan to care about Zhang Haoze anymore. No matter how worried she was, it was useless. He had a fiancée and had forgotten about her. She turned around and went back to her room to change her clothes. She planned to take a shower and sleep. Today's torment was enough. After returning to her room, Shi Mengwan had just found her pajamas and took off her top. The door to the room was suddenly opened, and she was shocked. Before she could turn around, her body was already hugged by Zhang Haoze. In front of her was the bed. Without thinking, he directly pressed her down on the bed. Mr. Zhang. Her lips were blocked. It was the same domineering and predatory kiss as before. This time, she didn't even have a place to escape. Behind her was the bed. In front of her was his strong chest. Shi Mengwan struggled, but she wasn't Zhang Haoze's match at all. Woo. Zhang Haoze, let go of me. But she couldn't make a sound. Other than the sound of clothes rubbing against each other, there was only the sound of cloth rubbing against each other. She was anxious. Zhang Haoze didn't speak in the car just now because he had been suppressing the drug in his body. But in this environment, the entire room was filled with Shi Mengwan's faint aura. The drug seemed to be unable to be suppressed anymore. He kissed Shi Mengwan as if he was biting her. Shi Mengwan was in pain. The moment Zhang Haoze's lips left her chin, she used all her strength to push him away. She quickly got up and wanted to run to the other side. But before she could run away, Jean Hauser pounced on her again. Shi Mengwan was anxious. She pressed her hands against his chest with all her might, forcing him to see her clearly. Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser, look clearly. Who am I? I'm Shi Mengwan, not Chen Feifei. Look clearly. Jean Hauser's movements paused for a moment. Shi Mengwan took the opportunity to push his body away again. Jean Hauser, you have a girlfriend. Please calm down. She didn't know if he could listen to her, and she didn't know how much he could listen to, but she had to say it. Jean Hauser's body froze there, and he kept panting heavily. His eyes were red, and he seemed to be trying his best to control himself. Shi Mengwan saw that his hands were tightly clenched into fists, and his body looked very stiff. A trace of unconcealable worry flashed across her eyes. Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser glanced at her and didn't say anything. He stood up as if he was about to leave. However, his footsteps staggered at this moment, and he was about to fall. Shi Mengwan went forward to support him without thinking. Jean Hauser. Was he okay? Shi Mengwan finally realized that something was wrong with Jean Hauser. Not only was he drunk, but his skin was also boiling hot. Even through a layer of shirt, she could feel the heat of his skin. You're sick. Jean Hauser stared at Shi Mengwan's red lips that were open and closed and pushed her away forcefully. Jean Hauser. Shi Mengwan took 2 steps back. Thinking of Jean Hauser's actions just now, she seemed to understand something. Do you want to wash your face? She went forward to support Jean Hauser. This time, he didn't push her away. He hugged her tightly and kept rubbing against her body. Shi Mengwan half supported and half dragged him towards the bathroom. Her house wasn't big. She was also a person who didn't care about anything when she was busy. There was only a shower in the bathroom, but no bathtub. She helped Jean Hauser stand under the shower. Do you want to take a cold shower? She read the book as if it would be better this way. Although she didn't know if it was true. As she spoke, Jean Hauser had already turned on the water. Shi Mengwan was caught off guard and was drenched. She had always cherished her body. She never took a cold shower or drank cold water. Suddenly being drenched like this, she couldn't stay any longer. She let go of Jean Hauser and quickly left. The sound of water behind her continued, but she didn't want to care anymore. When she returned to her room, she took her pajamas and hurried to another guest bathroom to take a shower. At this time, she had to be glad that she didn't connect the guest bathroom to the main bathroom and turn it into a big bathroom. Okay. When she came out, she found that the sound of water in the bathroom was still there. She frowned slightly. She wanted to go in and take a look, but she was afraid that Jean Hauser's symptoms were still there. After thinking about it, she decided not to care anymore. But this was her room, and the sound of water coming from the bathroom made it impossible for her to fall asleep. She turned around and went to the study. When she sat down, she realized that she wasn't in the mood to draw. She thought of her first kiss. When she was 12 years old, she lost her first kiss. At that time, she had been living with her dear brother for almost half a year. Dear brother was very good to her and took care of her. But he often had a cold face. No, he seemed to have a cold face to everyone. Even if he cared about her, he often said it with a cold face. That time, not long after the Spring Festival, it was the Lantern Festival. Southerners had to eat glutinous rice balls during the Lantern Festival. She used to live in the countryside, so these habits were well preserved. On the day before the Lantern Festival, she casually said that tomorrow was the Lantern Festival and she wanted to eat glutinous rice balls. The next day, dear brother really brought glutinous rice balls back. She was overjoyed, but that glutinous rice ball was so small. Is this glutinous rice ball? Why is it so small? She looked at the 2 bowls of glutinous rice balls and then at Dear Brother. Dear Brother nodded heavily and told her that this was glutinous rice ball. It was fine if she ate it, but it was fine if she didn't. Each place had its own customs. Shi Mengwan thought that perhaps in Lin City, glutinous rice balls were so small. She didn't know that Dear Brother didn't buy any glutinous rice balls at all, but fermented rice balls. How old was she at that time? She was 12 years old. The little bit of alcohol in it was enough to make her drunk. Moreover, the one that Dear Brother bought had a strong smell of alcohol. However, the 2 children didn't notice it at that time. Dear Brother, you're so good-looking. He was the best-looking person she had ever seen. Dear Brother also ate that, and his face was a little red. The youth had never drunk alcohol before, and the alcohol in it was enough to make him a little drunk. He looked at the girl in front of him. The 12-year-old girl had already begun to develop. In half a year, her body had grown a little taller. Her figure was slender and her facial features were beautiful. Especially those eyes, which seemed to be able to speak. The youth suddenly felt a little hot. After the first month, he was already 16 years old. He was a big boy. You're very beautiful too. The voice of the youth, who was approaching the end of his voice change period, wasn't as unpleasant to hear as it was at the beginning. Shi Mengwan blinked and looked at Dear Brother. No, you're even better looking. As she spoke, she sat beside the youth. Her small hand gently caressed the youth's facial features. Dear Brother, your eyebrows are beautiful, your nose is beautiful, your eyes are beautiful, and your face is beautiful. And. Her hand landed on his lips. She blinked, and her voice was a little drunk. Your mouth is also beautiful. The youth felt even hotter than before. The girl in front of him had bright eyes, white teeth, and skin like porcelain. He caught her hand and turned it to stroke her face. Wan is also beautiful. Her eyes are beautiful, her face is beautiful, and her mouth is also beautiful. He was imitating her words. Shi Mengwan blinked and suddenly smiled. You missed one, my nose. Is my nose not beautiful? Okay. The youth was very willing to coax her. Moreover, this was the truth. My Wan is beautiful in every way. Shi Mengwan smiled. Her smile made the small and shabby room seem to have suddenly become bright. The youth looked at Shi Mengwan's bright red lips in front of him. He couldn't help but lean over and gently kiss her lips. Their eyes met. The youth looked at the girl's clear eyes, and the girl looked at the youth's raised eyebrows. The youth suddenly realized what he had done and quickly retreated. The tips of his ears were dyed red without a trace. Half of it was because he was shy, and the other half was because he blamed himself. What was he doing just now? He actually kissed her. She was only 12 years old. Even after the new year, she would only be 13 years old. The girl didn't realize that she had been taken advantage of. She leaned over and held the youth's face. Dear brother, your mouth is so sweet. He had just eaten the wine-fermented meatballs, so his lips naturally had the taste of the wine-fermented meatballs. She wanted to eat it again, so she leaned over and took the initiative to press her lips against the youth's. It was a young and clumsy kiss. It was both the youth and the girl's first time. After the kiss, the girl felt satisfied. Under the influence of alcohol, she went back to her room and fell into a deep sleep. She didn't know that because of her kiss, the youth had an extremely shameful and absurd dream at night. She also didn't know that the youth, who had always been lazy, woke up early the next morning and hurriedly washed his clothes. He even changed the bed sheets. Shi Mengwan only knew that when she woke up the next day, she still remembered the kiss from yesterday. She blushed a little, but she felt happy. That person was her dear brother. From that moment on, a seed was planted in the girl's extremely secretive thoughts. She liked her dear brother, so she naturally didn't hate this kiss. But from the next day, her dear brother started to avoid her. He would avoid her sight, avoid her contact, and Shi Mengwan thought that her dear brother hated her and felt that she was frivolous. Yes, which good girl would run away from home at the age of 12 or 13? What kind of good girl would live with a half-grown boy? And which good girl would take the initiative to kiss a boy? All the education she had received since she was young told her that these things were wrong and wrong. She blamed herself, felt guilty, and felt ashamed. She felt that she had done something wrong. She shouldn't have taken the initiative to kiss her dear brother. Her dear brother probably hated her too. For those few days, she was extremely sad. In the end, she couldn't help but wake up early one day when the youth was about to go out and block the youth's path. Bang! She seemed to hear something coming from the bathroom next door. Shi Mengwan's thoughts were pulled back by that sound. She hurriedly got up and returned to her room. She hesitated for a moment. Listening to the sound of water inside, she resolutely went in. The shower head had fallen off at some point. Jean Hauser sat on the ground. His clothes were messy and all of them had been torn off by him. His body was abnormally red. His breathing was so heavy that she could easily hear it. She could even see Jean Hauser's tent that was set up high. He seemed to be very uncomfortable. He was constantly fighting with himself, but he didn't seem to succeed. The scene in front of her was really too special. Shi Mengwan's face was a little red, but she was more worried. She went forward and looked at Jean Hauser with obvious concern. Jean Hauser. Jean Hauser. She first turned off the shower head that was still spraying water at the wall. She bent down to help Jean Hauser up. Jean Hauser leaned against the wall with his eyes half closed. When he heard Shi Mengwan's voice, he opened his eyes. Shi Mengwan happened to bend down at this moment. She was shocked when she met Jean Hauser's eyes. It was a pair of wolf-like eyes. Fierce, violent, sinister, and deep. Shi Mengwan's body instinctively retreated, but it was already too late. Jean Hauser pulled her into his arms and kissed her accurately. Shi Mengwan didn't even have time to let out a low cry before she was kissed speechless by Jean Hauser. His body had been drenched in cold water for so long, but not only did his temperature not drop, it became even hotter and hotter than before. He was sitting on the ground, so Shi Mengwan maintained a rather uncomfortable posture. She felt very uncomfortable and wanted him to let go of her. But how could Jean Hauser let her go? He easily picked her up and completely imprisoned her in his arms. Shi Mengwan tried to push him, but this time, she failed. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't escape Jean Hauser's hands. More importantly, she was at a complete disadvantage at this moment. She was only wearing pajamas, and the thin fabric was easily lifted by Jean Hauser. He felt that it was troublesome, so he tore her clothes into pieces without any hesitation. Woo-woo. Chapter 654. Shi Mengwan was struggling with life and death. No matter what, she had to fight for a chance for herself. Even if he couldn't escape in the end, Jean Hauser had completely lost his mind. He still wanted to do something to her. She also wanted an experience that was relatively more respectful to her. It wasn't that he didn't feel conflicted. But now, he could only accept his fate. She was the one who brought him back. She was the one who gave him this chance. If she was destined to be unable to escape tonight, then she hoped that her first time would be in bed, not here, in a situation like this. Jean Hause was still kissing her neck, but when he heard her words, he paused. In the next second, she was easily picked up by him. He walked very quickly, as if he was in a hurry. She was tightly held in his arms, her body pressed against his chest. She looked up at him. His gaze was slightly different from before. There were a few more flickering flames inside. Her back touched the bed, followed by his rather heavy weight for her. She didn't close her eyes. Instead, she looked at Jean House's eagerness and domineering actions. Her heart trembled. Big brother. Jean Hause became even more eager to plunder the girl's body. The corner of her lip started to feel numb and painful from his kiss. She reached out her hand to support his face and looked at him attentively. This face overlapped with that of Big Brother when he was a teenager. They had the same eyebrows and the same eyes, but the person in front of him had lost the youthfulness of his youth, and was now more stable and mature. However, there was one thing that didn't change. His eyes were always sharp, like a lone wolf on the grassland. This face, these eyebrows, these eyes. She had thought about it countless times in her dreams. This was her big brother. He was the big brother who had been with her for more than a year. Shi Mingwan's eyes were burning. Big brother, please be gentle. At this moment, she didn't want to care about Jean House's identity. She didn't want to care about the woman beside him. She didn't want to care about the humiliation he had suffered. The face in front of her overlapped with that of her big brother from back then. Jean Hause was Big Brother, and Big Brother was Jean Hause. From the first time she saw him, she was sure of this. Big brother, Wan, please be gentler. She spoke very softly. She couldn't even guarantee that the other party would listen. But she had to say it. This was her first time, and the man on top of her was the big brother that she had been longing for so long. She had never wanted to be with another man in her life. If she was destined to have a man, she wanted her first time to be with her big brother. His lips were sealed once more, but this time, it was less urgent than before. There was a hint of gentleness in his tone. The man was trying his best to control himself. Ling Shui's move was extremely ruthless. There was no way he could resist the effects of alcohol and drugs. Perhaps there was a trace of clarity, but that trace of clarity disappeared when Shi Mengwan called him dear brother. The woman's eyes were like silk, and her body was soft. Her eyes were filled with gentleness. The flames that he had been restraining and suppressing just now were now completely ignited. Everything that happened after that was out of their control. Shi Mingwan's reality and memories were mixed together. Jean Hause and her dear brother had become one person. It was as if she had returned to the time when she was 12 years old. That arrogant and cold youth, but he treated her differently. Their skin was close, and their breaths were in harmony. She was like a cloud, floating up, down, and up with the wind. She floated beyond the clouds of the ninth heaven, unable to find a place to return to. However, she was also like a ship that had been floating on the sea. Now, she had found a place to return to. Dear brother. Dear brother, the moment she experienced the pain, she almost wanted to cry. She hugged him tightly and felt what he gave her. The man's breathing became even heavier. She was broken into pieces and was no longer complete. However, he filled her up and finally returned to being complete. Back and forth, it kept repeating. This night was exceptionally long. Shi Mengwan didn't sleep for long. She was a person who couldn't sleep easily when she had something on her mind. At dawn, she opened her eyes. Looking at the sky that was about to brighten, she turned over. Her body was extremely uncomfortable. It was as if her entire body had been disassembled. She followed the hand that was tightly wrapped around her waist and raised her eyes to look at the owner of the hand. Jean Hause had fallen asleep. His eyes were tightly closed. It seemed to be because of the intense exercise, but it also seemed to be because of the alcohol last night. His breathing was steady and long, and his chest rose and fell slightly. His face was no longer as red as it was yesterday. When he fell asleep, he didn't have the sinister aura that he had when he was awake. He looked completely harmless. She wanted to raise her hand and touch his face. Just such a simple action made her feel difficult. She wanted to sleep, but she couldn't. She felt tired when she got up. Seeing that the sky outside was getting brighter, Shi Mengwan finally decided to continue sleeping for a while. She turned around. Zhang Hao's hand was still wrapped around her waist. Because of her movements, the blanket slid to her waist. Because of this, Shi Mengwan also saw a scar on his left arm. That scar looked like it had been a long time ago, and the color was already very faint. His skin color was slightly pale. Therefore, this scar looked especially obvious. Yesterday, Shi Mengwan didn't have time to think, nor did she have time to seriously look at Zhang Hao's body. The sky was getting brighter, and the scar was getting clearer and clearer. It was about 5 centimeters long. Shi Mengwan raised her hand and gently caressed the spot. Her eyes suddenly felt a little sore. She had always believed that Zhang Hao was her dear brother. Now, this injury had completely confirmed her guess. Dear brother, when Shi Mengwan woke up in the morning, the young man was still sleeping. He had fought yesterday and suffered some injuries. Although they were all superficial wounds, his age also consumed a lot of vitality. Looking at the young man lying motionless on the bed, Shi Mengwan thought about the dozens of yuan she had given him yesterday. That money wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She regretted coming out for a day. She just wanted to go back to her home now. But there was a problem now. Without money, how was she going to go home? Shi Mengwan was already 12 years old. She thought about it and decided to go straight to the police station and find a police officer to send her home. Before she left, she was a little hesitant. Should she tell Zhang Hao? However, she wasn't familiar with him. It was just that she stayed here for a day yesterday. She said that she was borrowing him, but she even gave him money. Shi Mengwan didn't feel guilty at all when she thought about it. She took a look at the small house and finally left. Shi Mengwan had a good idea. She just needed to find the nearest police station. However, after she came out of the young man's house, she found that she was lost. The bungalows in this area were almost the same, and the alleys were connected in all directions. Every door looked almost the same to her. Shi Mengwan went around for a long time, but not only did she not get out, she even got lost. Just as Shi Mengwan was about to find a public phone to stop and call the police, a voice suddenly rang out. She actually met the 2 people who had been following her yesterday. 2 hooligans stood in front of Shi Mengwan. One was wearing a flowery shirt, and the other was wearing a black shirt. The man in the black shirt took a step forward and glanced at Shi Mengwan's face. Yo! Isn't this the little beauty from yesterday? The 2 of them had their eyes on Shi Mengwan yesterday. Such a young girl with good looks looked like she was alone and didn't have any family by her side. If they sold her, they would make a lot of money. Little beauty, since we met, it's fate. Come with your brothers. Shi Mengwan panicked when she saw these 2 people. She was lucky to escape yesterday, but it didn't mean that she would be so lucky today. Looking left and right, she ran back like she was flying. The 2 hooligans looked at each other and quickly followed behind her. Shi Mengwan wasn't familiar with this area, and she was being chased in a hurry. In her panic, she actually ran into a dead end. Little beauty, you can't run anymore, right? The man in the black shirt looked at Shi Mengwan, and the smile on his face became more and more vulgar. Don't run anymore. Follow your brother. Get lost. Shi Mengwan was anxious. She looked at the two people, then looked at the dead end in front of her, and fell into great despair. Seeing that the two hooligans were about to approach, she looked around in panic. Finally, she picked up a stone on the ground and held it in her hand, looking like she wanted to fight the two hooligans to the death. Little girl, you have character. Your brother likes you. The man in the flowery shirt glanced at the man in the black shirt, and the two of them moved forward together. Shi Mengwan waved the stone in her hand randomly. However, before she could hit the two of them, her hand was already grabbed by the two hooligans. Little beauty, let's go. Help. Help. Shi Mengwan cried out. Seeing this, the man in the flowery shirt covered Shi Mengwan's mouth. Woo woo. Shi Mengwan was anxious. Regret once again occupied her heart. She shouldn't have run away from home. The two hooligans dragged her out and were about to run out when the figure of a youth suddenly appeared in front of them. When Shi Mengwan saw the person, her eyes widened. It was him. That dear brother. The youth stood at the entrance of the alley. His gaze swept across the two hooligans, then he looked at Shi Mengwan. His eyes seemed to be filled with displeasure. Brat, don't be a busybody. The man in the flowery shirt glared at the youth and was quite rude. The youth stood there without moving or speaking. The two hooligans didn't take him seriously either. Especially when they saw the injuries on the youth's face, not only on his face, but also on his arms. They didn't take the youth seriously even more. When they passed by the youth with Shi Mengwan in tow, the youth didn't move. Shi Mengwan's mouth was blocked. She could only watch as the youth kept making whimpering sounds. The two hooligans didn't take the youth seriously and passed by him just like that. Unexpectedly, when they walked behind the youth suddenly turned around. He flew up and kicked the back of the man in the flowery shirt. The man in the flowery shirt was originally covering Shi Mengwan's mouth, but this sudden kick caught him off guard. The man in the flowery shirt was caught off guard. He let go of Shi Mengwan and his body fell forward. Without waiting for the man in the flowery shirt to get up, the youth kicked the man in the black shirt again. The man in the black shirt was on guard after the man in the flowery shirt fell. The youth didn't succeed. He wasn't annoyed. He waved his hand at the man in the black shirt and punched him. His fists were hurried, quick, and ruthless. The man in the black shirt wasn't prepared for this and was hit head-on. Brat. You're courting death. The man in the black shirt rushed towards the youth. At the same time, the youth pulled Shi Mengwan away and faced the two hooligans. Shi Mengwan didn't know the youth's name. She watched the youth fight one against two and thought of the scene where he was surrounded and beaten up by a group of people yesterday. Be careful. After she shouted, she remembered that she didn't seem to know the youth's name. Seeing that the man in the flowery shirt also stood up and rushed towards the youth, she panicked. Dear brother, be careful. The word dear brother made the youth look at her. Before the man in the flowery shirt's fist swept over, he quickly threw a punch at the other party. The young man's martial arts were all developed through punches and kicks in actual combat. The two hooligans couldn't take advantage of him for a moment. The man in the black shirt was anxious. When the man in the flowery shirt was holding the youth back, he took out a knife from his pocket. However, he didn't point it at the youth, but at Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan was stunned. She didn't expect such a sudden turn of events. Before she could react, the youth saw the man in the black shirt's actions and pounced in Shi Mengwan's direction. He hugged her tightly and tried to dodge the knife from the man in the black shirt. However, his arm was still stabbed by the man in the black shirt. Blood gushed out. The bright red blood stimulated the youth. There was still a knife in his arm, but it was as if he didn't care about his life. He pulled out the knife and rushed towards the two hooligans. Such a reckless move scared the two hooligans. The two of them actually fled in panic and didn't continue to tangle with him. "Dear brother, are you okay?" Shi Mengwan went forward and looked at the youth's bleeding arm. "What should we do? You're bleeding a lot." "Shut up." The youth glared at her and casually tore off his shirt and wrapped it around his arm. You have to go to the doctor like this." "Dear brother, I'll send you to the doctor." "Go to the doctor." The youth turned around and looked at Shi Mengwan. There seemed to be a hint of mockery on his face. "Do you have money on you?" Shi Mengwan bit her lip and was speechless for a moment. However, the youth just covered his bleeding arm and walked forward. Shi Mengwan didn't want to go home anymore. The other party had saved her, so she followed behind him worriedly. The young man turned into another alley, and there was an extremely small clinic there. The youth entered the door. There was a middle-aged man wearing a white coat inside. When he saw the youth enter and looked at the injuries on the youth's body, his expression immediately turned ugly. "Why did you fight again? Do you want to die?" The youth didn't say anything. He just pulled open the wound and showed it to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man stood up and looked at the youth's injury. "It's a little serious. Although it didn't hurt the bones, it still needs stitches. But I don't have any anesthesia here." "If you don't have it, then you don't have it. Cut the crap." Okay. You're quite capable." The middle-aged man was angry. After the youth sat down, he didn't give him any anesthesia and directly treated the youth's wound. When he was cleaning the wound, the youth's expression began to turn rather ugly. When the needle that was about to be stitched into the youth's flesh, the youth's entire body began to tremble. "Dear brother." Shi Mengwan wasn't an idiot. She had read The Romance of the Three Kingdoms and heard that Guangong scraped bones to treat wounds. However, the person in front of her wasn't Guangong. He was just a youth who looked 15 or 16 years old. "Dear brother. Are you okay?" She couldn't help but glare at the doctor. You gave him anesthesia." "Little girl, don't disturb me. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that the stitches will go smoothly." The middle-aged man didn't even raise his head. He just focused on stitching the wound. "Don't worry, a few stitches will be enough. He won't die." "But..." Shi Mengwan looked at the youth worriedly. His fists were clenched tightly, and large drops of sweat fell from his face. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but hold his wrist. He was injured because of her, and it was also because of her that he became like this. "Dear brother," the doctor stitched the wound and was still in the mood to joke. "Kid, when did you get to know a girl? She doesn't look like you." "Shut up." The youth's voice was really unpleasant to hear at this moment. He glared coldly at the middle-aged man, then looked at Shi Mengwan. She held his wrist, looking as if it was more painful than him. Inexplicably, he felt that the wound on his arm didn't seem to hurt so much anymore. The wound was finally stitched up and treated. The middle-aged man retracted his hand and looked at the youth's face. "All right, I won't say much. You've always had your own ideas. But I still have to remind you that your wound hasn't come into contact with water these few days, and you haven't carried heavy objects. Most importantly, for the sake of your life, you'd better not fight with others anymore. Got it? You're so long-winded." The youth stood up and moved his arm. Indeed, his bones weren't injured. It was just a flesh wound. He didn't care, nor did he thank him. He directly left the small clinic. "Dear brother." Shi Mengwan quickly followed behind the youth. The youth's footsteps weren't fast, so she easily caught up to him. "Thank you for today, thank you." You're welcome. We're just even. The youth glanced at Shi Mengwan. Although Shi Mengwan was young, she understood what he meant at this moment. She helped the youth yesterday, and he helped her today. However, Shi Mengwan felt that this was different. If it weren't for the youth today, she would have been taken away by those two hooligans. She really didn't dare to think about what kind of fate she would have had. We're not even. Dear brother, you saved me. Thank you. She said it very sincerely, but the youth completely ignored her. He walked straight to his home. Shi Mengwan followed behind him. At this moment, she wasn't in the mood to think about going home. Instead, she was thinking about the doctor's words. The wound couldn't touch water, nor could it carry heavy objects. Dear brother was only one person, and he saved her. She couldn't be ungrateful. Even if she wanted to go home, she would think about it in a few days. With this thought in mind, Shi Mengwan followed behind the youth. Dear brother, what's your name? Dear brother, you were really amazing just now. Dear brother, that doctor is too bad. He actually didn't give you anesthesia. Dear brother, does your wound still hurt? Dear brother, what's your surname? Dear brother, my name is Shi Mengwan. You can call me Wan Wan. That's what my mother calls me. Dear brother, shut up. The youth, who had been followed and questioned all the way, stopped and glared at Shi Mengwan. If you keep making noise, I'll beat you up. As he spoke, he raised his hand, as if he really wanted to hit her. Shi Mengwan stood still. Her eyes were clear and pure. She believed him without a trace of fear. The youth felt defeated. He glanced at Shi Mengwan, turned around, and continued walking forward. Dear brother. After entering the door, Shi Mengwan wanted to speak, but the youth suddenly stopped and stood in front of her. He was much taller than her. He stared at her face with a fierce gaze. Listen, you can stay, but you have to follow my rules. What rules? It wasn't like she wanted to stay. She just wanted to take care of him for a few days until his wound healed. The rule is to shut up. When I don't let you speak, you're not allowed to speak. Also, you're not allowed to call me dear brother. But my name is Qiao Zhe. You can call me Ah Zhe. Qiao Zhe's voice sounded very fierce. Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked at his eyes. She said timidly, but I think dear brother sounds better. Qiao Zhe glared at Shi Mengwan. His uninjured right hand clenched into a fist again. Shi Mengwan's gaze was too calm. He raised his hand and put it down again. Okay, since you call me dear brother, then go wash my clothes. Shi Mengwan didn't expect Qiao Zhe to really let her stay. She nodded. Okay. I'll help you wash your clothes. Anyway, when she was at home, she helped her family wash their clothes. She didn't think that this was a difficult situation. Instead, she felt that this was an opportunity to repay Qiao Zhe for saving her life. Qiao Zhe watched as Shi Mengwan walked into the bathroom in a few steps. When she really went to wash his clothes, his gaze became a little complicated. Just like that, Shi Mengwan stayed at Qiao Zhe's house. Shi Mengwan caressed the scar on Zhan Hao's arm. This scar was left behind to save her. Seeing this, she no longer had to doubt, nor did she have to look for it. Zhan Hao was dear brother, and dear brother was Zhan Hao. But why didn't Zhan Hao remember her at all? Could it be that she was the only one who held on to that memory of the past, but dear brother had completely forgotten about it? The hand that was originally pressing on Zhan Hao's scar was grabbed by someone. The person who was originally asleep had woken up at some point in time. At this moment, he was staring at her with his eyes open. Because he had just woken up, Zhan Hao's gaze was calm at this moment. His eyes were deep, but there was no trace of hostility. Shi Mengwan could even see a faint sense of peace in his gaze. Their eyes met, and there was silence. Shi Mengwan looked at him and was the first to look away. "You're awake." After asking a useless question, Shi Mengwan lowered her eyes uncomfortably. It was one thing to be prepared yesterday, but it was another to have sex. In the end, she was still a little shy. She didn't even dare to look into his eyes. Jean Hauser didn't say anything, but she couldn't help but say, "Dear brother." When these 3 words came out, Jean Hauser's expression changed slightly. Shi Mengwan lowered her head, but she didn't notice the change in his expression at all. "Dear brother. Are you all right now?" His appearance yesterday made her a little worried. She cared about him so much that she even forgot the discomfort on her body. "Dear brother, how are you now?" More than 10 years of concern, more than 10 years of searching. Shi Mengwan, who had never given up and never gave up. Not getting a response from Jean Hauser, she couldn't help but look up at him. Chapter 655. Being stared at like this, Shi Mengwan's exposed shoulder skin was inexplicably stained with a layer of coldness. She shrank her shoulders and looked at Jean Hauser with uncertainty. "Big brother." Jean Hauser turned over and pressed her under his body. He looked down at her face. "Dear brother." He raised his hand and gently pinched her chin. "Who are you calling?" "Big brother." He was very heavy, and Shi Mengwan couldn't breathe under his weight. "I'm calling you. Aren't you my dear brother?" Shi Mengwan didn't understand. She didn't know why he didn't remember her and didn't recognize her. However, that scar, as well as his appearance, had long since been engraved in her heart, and she had never forgotten it. "Big brother, have you forgotten?" "I'm Wan Wan." Jean Hauser stared at her face. He moved closer and looked into her eyes. He exerted a little force in his hand. "So, you thought I was someone else's substitute yesterday?" "What substitute?" Shi Mengwan was stunned for a moment and couldn't come back to her senses for a moment. After realizing what Jean Hauser meant, she shook her head quickly. "No, big brother, I didn't. I didn't think of you as someone else." She only knew that the person in front of her was the big brother that she had been thinking about. Why? Why didn't he admit it? He clearly was, yet he refused to admit it. He had forgotten her. He had forgotten everything that had ever existed between them. He felt hurt and a little anxious. They were already like this. She wanted to refresh his memory, to make him remember that they used to be. "Big brother. Look at me. I'm Shi Mengwan. You're Wan Wan." He pinched his lower jaw. Jean Hauser looked at her face, and his voice was as cold as the ice in December. "So, you like to play this kind of game?" "This isn't a game. I'm not treating you like someone else." He was the big brother, not someone else. "You didn't treat me as someone else." Jean Hauser sneered. Did she think he would believe her? "Then who is the big brother you're calling?" "It's you." Shi Mengwan looked at him with a firm gaze. "The dear brother I'm calling is you. You are my big brother." Tch, she felt pain on her lips. He had bitten her. Shi Mengwan blinked at him. "Dear brother," she couldn't speak the rest of her voice. Because Jean Hauser had already kissed her lips. "I'm not your big brother. Don't call me that." Big, Shi Mengwan's big word was swallowed up again. This time, Jean Hauser bit harder than before. "I'll say it again, don't call me dear brother." Shi Mengwan bit her lip and looked at Jean Hauser. Her expression changed from anticipation to disappointment, from determination to confusion. For a moment, she even suspected that she was wrong. Jean House's arm was on her side, and the scar was clear. Shi Mengwan didn't know why he didn't recognize her, nor did she know why he forgot. However, she had indeed developed a lot of negative emotions because of his forgetfulness. He was naked and she could feel the heat of his skin. That kind of temperature made her lose her mind again. Big brother. Jean House didn't stand on ceremony with her this time. The devouring tongue and lips robbed her of her breath. His big hand reached under the blanket. Soon, Shi Mengwan couldn't call him dear brother anymore. The effects of alcohol and drugs, and Shi Mengwan treating him as another man, made him angry. He robbed her of everything without any hesitation. In the end, Shi Mengwan could only let out broken words. Under his attack, she was utterly defeated. Chen Feifei threw the cup in her hand on the ground, her face full of anger. She glared at the maid in front of her with a gloomy look in her eyes. What do you mean? What do you mean brother Hao didn't come back yesterday? You better explain yourself clearly. The maid shivered. Chen Feifei's temper was completely unleashed on them. Miss, young Master Jean really didn't come back yesterday. There was no one in his room. Of course, Chen Feifei knew that there was no one in Jean House's room. But she didn't give up. She only thought that Jean House had gone out early. Jean House had the habit of morning exercise. He had to get up every morning and take a step. She thought that he had gone for a run. Ask Xiao Qin to drive the car over. I'm going out. Chen Feifei knew how to drive, but her health wasn't good, so her family was worried. For his daughter's convenience, Chen Yongchang assigned her a driver. Yes. Before Chen Feifei went out, she called Chen Yongchang and asked him what Jean House's arrangements were yesterday. Chen Yongchang didn't know what his precious daughter was going to do, but he still told her about Jean House's whereabouts yesterday. After asking, Chen Feifei went straight to the company. The Qin Corporation was also very famous in Lin City. Chen Yongchang started out in the aquaculture business. Later, he saw an opportunity. He started investing in real estate. He was also lucky and encountered a good opportunity. For a few years, his business was very big. He also had his own business in the neighboring city. In the past few years, with Jean House's participation, he listened to his words and began to expand into other industries. Now, the company was also quite large. Chen Feifei's car stopped at the company building. Everyone in the company knew Chen Feifei and knew that this young miss couldn't be offended. The front desk came out early in the morning and led the way for Chen Feifei. Chen Feifei went upstairs in an imposing manner and went straight to Jean House's office. However, Jean House wasn't in the office. This made Chen Feifei's expression even uglier. She started to call Jean House continuously. Jean House was woken up by the ringing of his phone. He didn't pick up the phone. Instead, he turned off the phone. When he got up, he looked at the unfamiliar environment in front of him and remembered where he was. Under the blanket, he couldn't find anything. He looked at Shi Mengwan, who was sleeping beside him. The woman's blanket barely covered her chest. The skin on her shoulder that wasn't covered by the blanket was covered with bruises. Jean House rarely lost control. No, it could be said that he had never lost control before. But last night, he lost control. Ling Shui's drug was indeed powerful. Mixed with alcohol, although it was quite difficult for him to resist, it wasn't really impossible for him to resist. But he lost control. Jean House rubbed the space between his eyebrows. His expression didn't look good. His gaze fell on Shi Mengwan's face. She was still sleeping very soundly. There was a faint green under her eyes, and her face was slightly pale. Jean House's expression became even uglier. His loss of control was mostly because of this woman's smell. He rubbed the space between his eyebrows and quickly got up. When he found his wet clothes in the bathroom, his phone rang again. He looked at the phone on it and picked it up. "Drive the car to Ye Yuan apartment and pick me up." "Oh right, help me bring a set of clothes over. I need them both inside and out." After hanging up the phone, Jean Hauser took a shower. When he came out of the bathroom, he only had a bath towel around his waist. Shi Mengwan was still sleeping and didn't show any signs of waking up. He stood by the bed and stared at her face for a long time. When there was a knock on the door, he left the room. The person standing outside the door was Tang Hua, his personal assistant. He didn't have any doubts about Jean Hauser appearing in an unfamiliar place. He just handed the bag in his hand to Jean Hauser. From the inside to the outside, there were shoes and clothes. Jean Hauser turned around, pulled off the bath towel, and began to change his clothes. "Young Master Jean, Miss has been looking for you since she woke up. She seems to have gone to the company now." "Yes." Young Master Jean, yesterday, Tang Hua wasn't a talkative person, but there were some things that he was indeed very concerned about. "That woman, Ling Shui, drugged me." Jean Hauser put on his clothes and turned to look at Tang Hua. "I'll leave the Ling family to you. I don't want to see this company again in the business world." "Yes." Tang Hua had always obeyed Jean Hauser's orders. Jean Hauser had already tidied himself up. He looked at Tang Hua. "Let's go to the company first." "Yes." Tang Hua followed Jean Hauser and the two of them left together. The moment the door closed, Jean Hauser looked in the direction of the room, but quickly looked away. Coincidentally, Shi Mingwan's apartment was very close to the company. Before going upstairs, Jean Hauser instructed Tang Hua a few things. A flash of surprise flashed across Tang Hua's eyes, but it was only for a moment. He quickly lowered his head. "Yes. I got it. Go." He was very relieved to leave the matter to Tang Hua. Tang Hua drove the car away and Jean Hauser entered the company hall. As soon as he entered, Secretary Lo Xian came over. "General Manager Jean. Miss is throwing a tantrum upstairs. Look, I got it. Go do your work. Find the contract from yesterday and let Secretary Zhao file it." When Jean Hauser entered the door, Chen Feifei was sitting behind his desk, sulking. "Brother Hao." When she saw Jean Hauser, even though Chen Feifei tried her best to control it, she still couldn't hide the anger on her face. "Yes. Why are you here at the company? Brother Hao." His calm appearance made Chen Feifei even angrier. However, the angrier she was, the more aggrieved she looked. "Brother Hao, where did you go yesterday? Why didn't you go home?" She spoke with extreme resentment. Even though she was already furious, she didn't want her sweetheart to see her bad side. In fact, when Jean Hauser was in university, he made a sum of money by speculating in stocks and futures. Then, he bought a house near the university town. For a period of time, he used the excuse that he was busy with his studies and company matters. He didn't want to travel back and forth and lived in his apartment. However, Chen Feifei refused. She said that if Jean Hauser wanted to live in the apartment, she would follow him. Later, Chen Yongchang had no choice but to buy the apartment opposite Jean Hauser. However, Chen Feifei's health wasn't good, so she couldn't be alone. No matter how big the apartment was, it wasn't as comfortable as home. Chen Yongchang loved his daughter. He had no choice but to beg Jean Hauser to agree to move back home. In the end, Jean Hauser took a step back, but asked to wait until he graduated from university. This request wasn't too much. Chen Yongchang had no choice but to agree. After Zhang Haoze graduated from university, he entered Qin Yongchang's company. He moved back to the Qin family. He would occasionally go to the apartment for 2 days. But every time, it would make Qin Feifei unhappy. I was too busy last night, so I slept in the apartment. Brother Hao, is what you said true? Qin Feifei looked like she was about to cry. Why did you lie to me? You didn't come back yesterday, so I asked the cleaning auntie to go to the apartment to take a look. You didn't go back at all yesterday. The apartment was cleaned regularly, and the person who arranged it was Qin Feifei. Zhang Haoze looked at her with an unclear expression. The angrier she was, the more aggrieved she looked. The angrier she was, the more aggrieved she looked. Her eyes were red, and with her current expression, she looked weak and frail. Brother Hao, you actually lied to me. You never lied to me before. Do you not care about me anymore? You didn't go home at all yesterday, and you weren't in the apartment. Brother Hao, I'm not checking on you. I'm just concerned about you. Don't you know how worried I was about you when you didn't go home? I really didn't go home yesterday. Zhang Haoze looked at Qin Feifei's face. He thought of Ling Shui. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei stopped complaining and looked at him with red eyes. However, there's a reason. Zhang Haoze walked to the sofa and sat down. He lowered his eyes and looked at the financial magazine on the coffee table. Qin Feifei didn't say anything. She just looked at him with concern. Yesterday, your dad asked me to sign a contract with Chairman Ling. I know. I asked Dad. Qin Feifei was angry in her heart, but she looked understanding on her face. I know that you've worked hard for the company over the past few years. But, do you have to sign the contract all night? She pouted and her eyes were still red as she looked at Zhang Haoze. Such a delicate beauty, in front of a man, showed such complete trust, and was also full of gratitude. If it was another man, he would probably want to hold Qin Feifei in his arms and comfort her. Feifei, I didn't sign the contract all night, but something happened yesterday. Zhang Haoze raised his head and looked at Qin Feifei with a complicated expression. Something happened yesterday. What happened? Can you tell me? Chairman Ling's daughter, Ling Shui, was also there yesterday. She's very interested in me. What did you say? Qin Feifei stood up and looked at Zhang Haoze. She realized that she had lost control. She sat down in front of Zhang Haoze again and regained her worried expression. Doesn't she know about my relationship with you? She knows, but I think she doesn't care, right? But... Qin Feifei almost twisted her fingers, but she forced herself to put on a victim's expression. Brother Hao, you're mine. Don't tell me you like that Shui. Feifei. I don't like her, but I did do something wrong to you yesterday. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei almost couldn't sit still. Zhang Haoze seemed to be a little helpless. She drugged me yesterday, and I drank some wine. Brother Hao. Qin Feifei's expression completely changed. She sat there with a pale face, as if she would collapse at any moment. What do you mean? Feifei, I'm sorry. Zhang Haoze didn't say anything else. What else did Qin Feifei not understand? You guys. You guys really? Really? Qin Feifei's face was pale, and she looked like she had been hit. Zhang Haoze lowered his head, looking like he didn't want to say anything more. Qin Feifei reached out and hugged Zhang Haoze tightly. Brother Hao, it's okay. It's okay. I know you didn't do it on purpose. You couldn't help it. I won't blame you. If she wanted to blame someone, blame that damn woman. Qin Feifei raised her head and looked at Zhang Haoze. Brother Hao, don't worry. I'm really not angry. I'll tell Dad to arrange less work for you in the future. Even if you want to talk about cooperation with others, I'll tell him to arrange more people for you. Fei, there's no need. Not everyone is like Ling Shui. Of course, not everyone was as shameless as that woman. Chen Fei was so angry that her gums started to hurt. Holding Zhang Hao's arm, her voice was very soft. Brother Hao, thank you. You're enduring it for me. I won't take this matter to heart, and I won't be angry. Don't worry. Okay. Zhang Hao nodded and didn't intend to continue this topic. You came here so early. Did you have breakfast? I didn't eat. You didn't come back all night. How could I be in the mood to have breakfast? I'll get someone to bring breakfast in. You can eat first. Okay. Chen Fei nodded and wasn't in a hurry to leave. After eating with Zhang Hao and telling him not to work too hard, she got up and left. However, she didn't go home as she had told Zhang Hao just now. Instead, she went around to Chen Yongchang's office. Damn woman, damn Ling Shui, she dared to steal her man. She wanted to teach her a lesson. After Chen Fei left, Zhang Hao's face didn't have the same expression as before. He stood up expressionlessly and walked to the back of his desk to sit down. It would take some time for Tang Hua to swallow Ling's company. Before that, he would leave a small role like Ling Shui to Chen Fei. After all, he was very clear about Chen Fei's combat strength after all these years. Chen Fei thought that she had disguised herself very well in front of him, but she didn't know that no matter how she disguised herself, her true nature would still be revealed. After dealing with Chen Fei and Ling Shui, Zhang Hao was in a good mood. The moment he opened the file, Shi Mingwan's sleeping face suddenly flashed across his mind. She was exhausted yesterday. At this time, she should still be sleeping, right? Zhang Hao, who realized what he was thinking, had an ugly expression on his face. He retracted his thoughts and focused all his attention on work. When Shi Mingwan woke up, it was already past afternoon. The room was empty, and there was no sound at all. Zhang Hao had already left. Shi Mingwan bit her lip and turned over. This simple action made her entire body feel uncomfortable. She felt a little wronged and a little disappointed. Zhang Hao ran away just like that after having sex with her. He didn't care at all. It was her first time. This realization made her uncomfortable. Not only her body, but also her heart. Her heart felt even more uncomfortable. Dear brother didn't acknowledge her and forgot about her. Now, he treated her like an antidote, throwing her away after using her. All of this filled Shi Mingwan with disappointment. Her disappointment didn't last for long. After realizing what time it was, Shi Mingwan quickly got up to look for her phone. Her phone was left in the study next door yesterday. Sure enough, there were at least dozens of missed calls from morning until now. Most of them were from colleagues in the studio, and one was from Su Qingsang. She was still feeling very uncomfortable, so she didn't plan to go out today. She told Xiao Ji that she was sick and wasn't feeling well. She wanted to rest at home for 2 days. If there was anything, she could email her or call her. She called Su Qingsang again. She asked her to go to her place for dinner. After telling her that there was an event at the company, Shi Mingwan hung up the phone. She went to the kitchen and casually cooked a bowl of noodles for herself. She was still feeling uncomfortable, so she went back to sleep after taking a shower. Shi Mingwan, who was sleeping, once again dreamed of the winter when she was 12 years old. It rarely snowed in Lin City, but the winter here was still considered cold. They lived in that small bungalow. There was no heating, air conditioning, or heater. There was only one blanket in Chao Zai's house. It turned out that during the summer, Shi Mingwan, who slept on the sofa, was covered with a blanket. Now that the weather was cold, she couldn't cover herself with a blanket. Shi Mengwan was woken up by the cold for several nights. Then, she could only wrap herself tightly with the blanket, but it was useless. On the third night, Qiao Zhe woke up. He looked at Shi Mengwan and told her to sleep on the bed. "Dear brother, I'll sleep on the bed. Are you going to sleep on the sofa?" At that time, Shi Mengwan was still very naive. However, Qiao Zhe was only a teenager. Compared to her, the sofa was even smaller for him. He couldn't even stretch his feet straight when he slept on it. Shi Mengwan took the initiative to speak after seeing how Qiao Zhe slept. "Are you going to sleep?" "Yes." Shi Mengwan was really afraid of the cold. At that time, it was already past the Mid-Autumn Festival of the lunar calendar. It would be even colder later on. She didn't want to be cold. However, she didn't expect that when she slept on the bed, Qiao Zhe would also sleep on the bed. At first, Shi Mengwan was a little awkward and uncomfortable, but after sleeping for 2 days, she was completely at ease. The youth's gaze was calm, and Shi Mengwan's gaze was clear. One treated the other as a sister, and the other as a brother. The pure friendship between siblings wouldn't have any bad thoughts. Shi Mengwan dreamed of the first night Zhe slept with her. She still remembered that she was still a little embarrassed. She went to bed early and curled up on one side of the bed, occupying a very small space. However, dear brother slept in the middle of the bed rather rudely. At that time, he really didn't sleep well. Sometimes, when he fell asleep, he would squeeze over to her side. At this time, Shi Mengwan could only move out more and more carefully. She also had to be careful not to fall under the bed. Later, the knocking on the door woke Shi Mengwan up from her dream. She was very tired and sleepy. She was woken up by someone and didn't want to get up to open the door. However, the knocking on the door didn't seem to give up. It was still going on. Shi Mengwan had no choice but to get up, put on a coat, and open the door. Unexpectedly, the person standing outside was actually Zhang Haoze. Zhang Haoze looked at Shi Mengwan. After sleeping for a day, her face had recovered a little, but it still didn't look good. He entered the door silently. His attitude was as comfortable as if he was returning to his own home. Zhang Haoze. He didn't like to call her dear brother, so she wouldn't call him that. But what did he mean now? Didn't he leave? Didn't he only treat her as the antidote? Since that was the case, then why did he come back? Chapter 656. Zhang Haoze entered the door and walked to the sofa to sit down. His relaxed expression made Shi Mengwan feel a little unhappy, as if he treated this place as his home. Didn't he leave? Since he left, why did he come back? While she was unhappy, she felt a little expectant. Did Zhang Haoze remember what happened in the past? Or, she pursed her lips, took a few steps forward, and stood by the coffee table. She didn't sit down. She just stood there and looked at him. Zhang Haoze was tall. Even if he was sitting, he wasn't much different from Shi Mengwan, who was standing. The two of them looked at each other like this. Shi Mengwan tried her best to control her emotions and not let herself show even a trace of happiness. In fact, compared to Zhang Haoze disappearing without a trace, his appearance now made her feel more or less comforted. What's the matter? Shi Mengwan's tone sounded a little cold. Zhang Haoze narrowed his eyes slightly. She had probably just woken up, and her hair was a little messy. She was wearing a black sports coat and a set of pink pajamas inside. The nondescript combination gave her a sense of laziness. The V-neck of the pajamas made him see the snow-white skin at a glance. There were still purplish-red hickeys on it. He could easily remember how he had left marks on her body yesterday. The memories of last night made Jean Hauser a little stiff. Next month, his tense face looked a little solemn. His gaze returned to Shi Mingwan's face, and he took out a box from his pocket. He placed it on the coffee table and pushed it forward. "Eat it." Shi Mingwan didn't see what it was at first, but after she saw it clearly, her expression suddenly changed. On the coffee table, the word Yuding was written on the box, which deeply stimulated Shi Mingwan's nerves. Jean Hauser, she stood there, feeling a chill in her hands and feet. Yesterday, she and he had slept together like a pair of mandarin ducks, but today, he had given her this. "I should thank you for your thoughtfulness now, shouldn't I? Last night was just an accident." She hadn't had time to recover from the fact that she had a relationship with Jean Hauser. His actions today were like a basin of cold water that was poured over her head. She really hadn't thought about children. It was too far away for her. Moreover, to Jean Hauser, she might just be an irrelevant passerby. He had lost his head last night, and he thought of her as an antidote. No matter which one it was, she really didn't think about the child and even forgot to take precautions. Jean Hauser didn't say anything. Shi Mingwan stood there and felt her hands and feet gradually regain some warmth. She took a step forward and picked up the box of medicine. "Sorry to trouble you, I'll take the medicine. I'll eat later. You can go." Jean Hauser didn't move, and Shi Mingwan didn't want to be entangled with him. Yesterday was a dream come true. She kept thinking about her dear brother and finally had a chance to interact with him. Even if this kind of interaction was just a one-sided dream. Today, Jean Hauser would let her know that if this was a dream, it could only be a nightmare. She couldn't tolerate it, she couldn't let it go, and she couldn't accept that her big brother had become like this. "Mr. Jean, please." Jean Hauser looked at her face, as if he didn't understand what she was angry about. He stood up and walked in front of her. His gaze fell on the box in her hand. "Are you angry?" Shi Mingwan stood there without moving. There was a hint of stubbornness in her expression. She was very beautiful, with a delicate beauty, and her stubborn expression at this moment. Her red lips were slightly opened, and she refused to give in to him. Her eyes were full of momentum. Jean Hauser turned his face slightly, and his body involuntarily took half a step forward. He stared at the arrogance on her face. "Didn't you say to take the medicine?" Shi Mingwan suddenly looked at him. For a moment, her eyes were indescribably complicated. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists, which were hanging by her side. She glared at Jean Hauser and quickly turned around to go to the kitchen. When she came out of the kitchen, there was a glass of water in her hand. She opened the medicine in front of Jean Hauser. She took out a pill and was about to put it in her mouth when Jean Hauser suddenly held her hand. Shi Mingwan's hand stopped in midair. She looked at Jean Hauser with confusion and mockery. "What are you doing, Mr. Jean?" Jean Hauser slowly took the pill from her hand. He leaned over and looked at Shi Mingwan's face. He placed the pill and the glass of water back on the coffee table. "Mr. Jean, this medicine will have an effect if it's taken within 72 hours. And then..." Jean Hauser pulled Shi Mingwan's body into his arms. "If that's the case, then don't waste this time." Shi Mingwan quickly understood what he meant. He carried her in his arms and carried her to the room. Shi Mingwan's expression changed drastically when she realized what he wanted to do. "Jean Hauser, are you crazy?" He didn't love her. Yesterday was an accident. Did he still want to continue today? "Jean Hauser, put me down." The distance from the living room to the room was too short. Shi Mingwan felt that in less than 10 seconds, she had already been placed on the bed by Jean Hauser. The moment her body touched the bed, she quickly bounced up and wanted to leave from under Jean Hausa. However, she was once again pressed under Jean Hausa's body. As she got up, he restrained her hands. At the same time, he kissed her lips. Woo woo. Sure Mengwan couldn't say the rest of her words. Her body still had the feeling he gave her yesterday. Her back was sore and her legs were weak. She wasn't his match at all. Her coat was taken off and thrown on the ground. The thin pajamas inside weren't an obstacle to Jean Hausa at all. He easily tore the pajamas into pieces. Sure Mengwan was like a peeled egg. She appeared in front of him without any cover at all. This also made it much easier for Jean Hausa. He could see the marks on her body more clearly. Her skin was very good. Her body was very delicate and white. The more it was like this, the more obvious the marks that hadn't faded became. Those marks were left by him. Jean Hausa. Sure Mengwan didn't want to continue with him. She struggled to get up, but he easily suppressed her with one hand. He kissed her lips again, not giving her a chance to make a sound, nor did he give her a chance to resist. Everything had just begun. Sure Mengwan washed her clothes and tidied up Xiao Zhe's 2 extremely small rooms. Finally, she went to the kitchen and looked at the things in the kitchen. Yes, there was an electric rice cooker, a pot, and even a pressure cooker. The pots, bowls, ladles, and pots were all complete. There were also daily necessities, rice, oil, and salt. Sure Mengwan tidied up the kitchen, came out of the kitchen, and went to look for Xiao Zhe. Dear brother. Unexpectedly, she saw Xiao Zhe changing his clothes. She let out an "aw" and quickly turned around. The young man's shirt was covered in blood. He had no choice in the small clinic just now. Now that he was out, he naturally had to change. He still had to go out at night. The young man's body was slender, so there was nothing to look at. However, Sure Mengwan was still a little girl, so she naturally felt embarrassed. What are you screaming for? Xiao Zhe impatiently buttoned 2 buttons on his shirt and walked in front of Sure Mengwan. Haven't you seen it before? It wasn't that she hadn't seen it before. When she was at home, her father and a few uncles would also be bare-chested. However, those were her family. And Xiao Zhe. Why did you call me? Sure Mengwan realized that he was already dressed, so she only dared to look up at him. The young man had recovered quite well. Yesterday, his face was bruised and swollen, but today, his injuries had healed a lot. She pursed her lips and told him about her discovery. I just realized that there's rice in the kitchen. Look, it's not healthy for you to eat outside. Why don't we buy some vegetables and cook at home? Of course, Xiao Zhe knew that there was rice and oil at home, but the problem was, do you know how to cook? Yes. She was the eldest daughter in the family. When her mother was pregnant, she was the one who helped with the chores. Every day when she came home from school, she had to cook for her parents. The young man glanced at Sure Mengwan and suddenly sneered. Buy vegetables. Where did you get the money? Didn't I yesterday? Sure Mengwan's words were interrupted by the young man. You mean your dozens of yuan? I just paid the medical fees. Sure Mengwan let out an "aw." She didn't remember seeing the young man pay, but since he said he paid, then he paid. At this moment, the young man suddenly approached Sure Mengwan with an evil smile on his face. Why don't I sell you? That way, I'll have money to buy vegetables. Sure Mengwan was shocked by his sudden approach, but she shook her head firmly. You won't sell me. You're not me. How do you know I won't? I know anyway. You just won't. After Sure Mengwan said this, she lowered her head. She wasn't in the mood to argue with Xiao Zhe now. If there's no vegetables, then there's no vegetables. Then let's eat plain rice. I'll do it. After paying the medical fees, she had no money to buy vegetables, so she could only eat plain rice. Shi Mengwan entered the kitchen, but she began to feel a little conflicted. Dear brother was still injured, so he should eat better. But in this situation, he couldn't even eat vegetables. How could she give dear brother nutrition? Perhaps she should think of a way to earn money. When Shi Mengwan washed the rice, she began to be a little lost in thought. What could she do? She was only 12 years old, so she definitely wouldn't be able to find a job. Perhaps she could start collecting trash tomorrow. But that wasn't good either. She wasn't familiar with this place. These alleys were full of twists and turns, so she wouldn't be able to recognize them all without some time. Why don't I tell dear brother? Let him bring her along. If he wasn't willing, then she would think of another way. She washed the rice and put it into the rice cooker. She measured the water and plugged it in. When the rice was ready, Shi Mengwan leaned against the kitchen stove in a daze. In the past, her parents would occasionally give her pocket money at home. At that time, she still felt that she didn't have much use for money. If she had known earlier, she would have taken more money when she ran away from home. Now it was all right. She heard the sound of the door closing and came out of the kitchen. She found that Xiao Zhe had returned at some point in time. He was holding 2 bags in his hand. When did you go out? Shi Mengwan didn't see him go out at all. Why did he come in from outside now? Go cook. The youth handed the bag in his hand to Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan looked at the vegetables inside. There were potatoes, tomatoes, vegetables, eggs, and meat. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough for 2 people. Where did you get the money? Didn't he say that he had no money just now? Cut the crap. Didn't you say that you know how to cook? Go quickly. Shi Mengwan nodded and took the vegetables into the kitchen. Her cooking skills weren't good, but she was used to doing housework, so she moved quickly. In less than an hour, 3 dishes and a soup were ready. After she finished, she realized that she seemed to have cooked a little too much. There were only the 2 of them eating, so why would they need so much? However, what happened next exceeded her expectations. Not only did the youth eat all the dishes she cooked, but he also finished the rice she cooked for 2 people in the rice cooker. The way he wolfed down the food made Shi Mengwan wonder if this person hadn't eaten for a few days. After eating, Shi Mengwan could tell that the youth was in a good mood. This also meant that she could stay here. Shi Mengwan washed the dishes and tidied up the kitchen. She thought that Xiao Zhe was actually quite a good person. He had saved her and taken her in. When Shi Mengwan was about to take a shower at night, she finally realized the problem. She originally thought that she could go home today, so she wore this outfit yesterday. She could barely sleep on the sofa with her clothes on. But today, she was caught by those 2 hooligans and ran so far away. Her body was even stained with Xiao Zhe's blood. Her clothes were so dirty that she couldn't wear them anymore, but there were no clothes she could wear here. Shi Mengwan thought about it and went to look for Xiao Zhe. Dear brother, do you have any extra clothes? Xiao Zhe was taller than her, so he definitely didn't have any clothes she could wear. But she still wanted to ask. A t-shirt will do. Any clothes will do. After eating, the youth was busy in his room. When he heard her words, he glanced at her. He had noticed just now that the clothes on the girl's body were stained with his blood. He went to the closet, found a t-shirt, and threw it to her. The youth was taller than her, and the t-shirt was also longer. Shi Mengwan took the shirt and thought that it could be used as pajamas. She went to the bathroom to take a shower, then changed her clothes and washed them. In the end, when she put on the long t-shirt and was about to go out, she found a problem. She didn't have any underwear inside, so it felt strange. She stayed in the bathroom for a long time, not knowing how to get out. Perhaps she could trouble Xiao Zhe again. Ask him to buy a set of underwear for her. Someone knocked on the bathroom door a few times, and Xiao Zhe's voice sounded outside the door. Did you die inside? Come out, I want to brush my teeth. No matter how embarrassed Shi Mengwan was, she had no choice but to come out. When she met Xiao Zhe's seemingly dissatisfied gaze, she shrunk her neck in the basin with the washed clothes in her hand. I also washed the clothes. Xiao Zhe didn't look at her, but went into the bathroom. Shi Mengwan heaved a sigh of relief and took the clothes to the small balcony to dry them. She felt uncomfortable while she was drying the clothes. She blocked Xiao Zhe a few times and wanted him to make another trip, but she couldn't open her mouth. In the end, she could only pull down the t-shirt with all her might and sit on the sofa, not daring to move. When Xiao Zhe came out and was about to leave, he saw Shi Mengwan like a primary school student. Her legs weren't tight, and her hands were placed on her knees without moving. You're going out. However, dear brother. It seemed that he was really nice. Go change. Xiao Zhe glanced at her. As for the one you're wearing, I'll use it as your pajamas. Thank you, dear brother. Shi Mengwan was extremely happy. Not only because dear brother bought her clothes, but also because dear brother was stubborn but soft-hearted. He said that he wouldn't care about her, but he still did. Dear brother was so nice. Sister Shi, how about we order the takeout from the restaurant you mentioned last time? Sister Shi. Yes. Shi Mengwan came back to her senses and found that Xiao Qiu was staring at her with a puzzled gaze. Shi Mengwan sat up straight. What did you say? I said, how about we order the takeout from the restaurant you mentioned last time? Didn't you say that you were tired of the previous ones? Okay. Shi Mengwan didn't object. You decide. Then I'll go order. Xiao Qiu looked at Shi Mengwan and didn't ask further. However, before she left, her gaze swept across the design drawing in front of Shi Mengwan. Shi Mengwan naturally noticed her gaze. She looked at the design drawing, picked it up, and tore it up without hesitation. After tearing it up, she supported her forehead with one hand and half-closed her eyes. She thought of Jean Hauser again. When she woke up this morning, Jean Hauser was no longer in the house. If it weren't for the glass of water and the box of birth control pills on the coffee table, Shi Mengwan would have thought that yesterday was her fantasy again. Jean Hauser, Xiao Zhe. These two people only had one word in their names, and they looked the same. But the way they did things was completely different. Dear brother was stubborn but soft-hearted. No matter what, he would protect her and take care of her. But what about Jean Hauser? What kind of person did he think she was? He came and went as he pleased. She didn't see Jean Hauser this morning, and this was the second time. Shi Mengwan couldn't help but feel a little wronged. What did Jean Hauser mean? For the next half a month, Shi Mengwan didn't see Jean Hauser again. After the Mid-Autumn Festival in Lin City, the weather began to cool down. It was December. Shi Mengwan's studio also began to get busy. At the end of every year, major companies would have many annual meetings. Often at this time, the orders would increase. Not only were there engagement dresses, but there were also many people who came to make dresses. Many people came in advance to prepare. Shi Mengwan became busy and didn't think too much about Jean Hauser. Occasionally, in the dead of night, she would think about what that person was doing. But soon, this kind of mood would be replaced by busyness. This kind of busyness continued until the end of December. As the wife of the president of Tianyu Group, Su Qingsang also had to attend the annual meeting of Tianyu Group. Her dress was prepared by Shi Mengwan. On the day of the meeting, Shi Mengwan also attended. Wan. When Shi Mengwan entered the door, Su Qingsang walked towards her. "You're here." "Yes. I have to see a lot of people today. I might not be able to take care of you. Take care of yourself later. Call me if you need anything. Don't worry, I'm not a child. I need you to take care of me wherever I go." Shi Mengwan really didn't need Su Qingsang to take care of her. She walked to the long dining table to get a drink. Her gaze fell on Su Qingsang. She might not even know it, but ever since she married Hu Jinyao, her temperament had begun to change. A hint of envy appeared in her eyes. Whether Hu Jinyao was the president or an employee, he was really good to Su Qingsang. Shi Mengwan casually took a drink and took a sip, only to realize that she was drinking wine. However, this wine tasted good, so she simply drank up the whole glass. The moment she put down the glass, she saw Zhang Hao's figure from afar. Chapter 657. Chen Feifei looked at Zhang Hao eagerly. There was obvious affection. She hooked her hand around Zhang Hao's arm, looking very intimate. "Brother Hao. I didn't expect President Hua to be the president of Tianyu Group. He looks so young." "Yes," Zhang Hao replied. He wasn't too surprised. He had dealt with Hu Jinyao before. Also, he is so good to his wife. Chen Feifei looked in Su Qingsang's direction, and she couldn't help but feel a bit envious. Who wouldn't envy a woman like Su Qingsang? To have a man like Hu Jinyao, who was not only rich and handsome, but also good to her. Zhang Hao didn't reply. Chen Feifei couldn't help but stand in front of him. "Brother Hao, when we get married in the future, you will treat me like President Hu treats his wife. Right?" Zhang Hao pursed his thin lips and did not respond to Chen Feifei's words. Chen Feifei's eyes were filled with disappointment, but she forced herself to smile. "Brother Hao, you'll always take care of me, right?" Zhang Hao responded softly, and his voice was a little perfunctory. Chen Feifei was not annoyed. Zhang Hao had always been like this. If she wanted to be angry, she would have been angered to death. Anyway, she believed that she and Zhang Hao had been together for more than 10 years. This was something that no one could compare to. "Brother Hao, I saw Miss Luo and Miss Song. Let's go and say hello." The Qin family had business dealings with both the Luo and Song families, and she also wanted to bring Zhang Hao to them. "Go ahead. I'm going to the bathroom. Then go quickly and come back quickly. You know, when you're not around, I feel like I've lost my soul." Zhang Hao didn't respond to Chen Feifei's words. He took her hand away from his and went to the bathroom. Chen Feifei pursed her lips into a straight line. In a place where Zhang Hao couldn't see, there was a flash of gloominess in her eyes. She had spent a month fighting with Ling Shui. The conditions of the Ling family were similar to her family. Speaking of which, she could be considered a difficult woman to deal with. However, it was a pity that Ling Shui loved to play around. Relying on her good family background, she did not put men in her eyes. It was too easy to find dirt on such a woman. Chen Feifei spent a lot of effort to find Ling Shui's weakness. She was sure that Ling Shui was in a terrible fix now, and it was impossible for her to have the time to pester Zhang Hao anymore. Zhang Hao should have time to accompany her without that woman's entanglement, but he had become very cold to her recently. When she asked, he said he was busy with work. In fact, the company was really busy recently. In this way, she couldn't even lose her temper. He didn't even want to bring her to the banquet tonight. If she hadn't happened to see the invitation in his office, she wouldn't have known. Chen Feifei was a little annoyed, but she would not show all her negative emotions in front of Jean Hauser. Curling up the corners of her lips, she walked towards the group of socialites with a perfect smile. She was the eldest daughter of the Qin family. She had to maintain her most appropriate side at all times. Shi Mengwan had already put down her wine glass when she saw Jean Hauser. She tried to look as if she hadn't noticed. But her action of putting down the glass was a little forceful. For more than half a month, Jean Hauser never appeared again. She treated those 2 nights as a dream. During this period of time, she constantly convinced herself that it was just a dream. She had already started to let go, but she saw such a scene again. She had heard from Su Qingsang that Jean Hauser had a fiancé. She also remembered seeing Jean Hauser and Chen Feifei together. At that time, the two of them didn't have a real relationship, and she wasn't 100% sure that the other party was Qiao Zhe. But now, she couldn't bear to watch any longer. She walked away from the table and headed for the bathroom. After leaving the banquet hall, Shi Mingwan's phone rang. It was a call from home. She took the phone and walked to the corner at the end of the corridor to answer it. The stairwell was right next to it, and it was far away from the elevator, so there was no need to worry about people coming over. Her mother asked her if she would go home on New Year's Day. Shi Mengwan didn't give a precise answer. There were many things to do at the end of the year. She really couldn't guarantee that she would have the time to go back. Your sister misses you very much. She's asked about you several times. He said he wanted to go to Lin City to see you. Shi Mingru was Shi Mingwan's younger sister. The little baby girl from back then was already 13 years old and was in junior high school. The little girl had been close to this sister since she was young. She wanted to be with her sister the moment she returned home. Okay. I think I'll go back when I'm free. You should come back when you're free. Your grandmother hasn't been in good health recently. She's been missing you. Grandmother would miss her. Didn't she always think of herself as a money-losing commodity? Even though she had earned money outside and even bought a house. In her grandmother's eyes, she was inferior to her uncle's cousin. Wasn't it a little ironic? She was already used to it. Her grandmother's preference for boys was engraved in her bones and couldn't be changed easily. Silence. Even if Shi Mengwan went back, she wouldn't go to see her grandmother. So there was no need to say anything else. Wan. Shi Mingwan's voice sounded a little cautious. Is there anything else? Mom. Are you still blaming your grandmother? It's nothing. Shi Mengwan leaned against the wall behind her. The wall was a little cold, but she felt that this could keep her awake. Mom, don't think too much. I'm not coming back because I don't have time. If I have time, I'll naturally go back. Wan. His face was magnified in front of her eyes. The man in front of her was undoubtedly good-looking. Not only was he good-looking, but he also had a temperament that enchanted women. Cold, arrogant, and deep. With a hint of arrogance and untamed. Such a man was dangerous to women. He was like poppy soya. His lips were slightly cold. In this season, it was undoubtedly a little cold outside. Shi Mengwan had been outside for so long, and her limbs were already cold. Compared to his lips, his chest was much warmer. She was hugged by him and stimulated by his kiss. Her limbs were warm, but at the same time, she regained her rationality and thought. What was he doing? He was kissing her. At the same time that he brought his fiancée to this banquet hall, he was actually kissing her here. What kind of person did he think she was? Shi Mengwan was furious. She tried to push him, but she couldn't push him away. She raised her foot to kick him, but he clamped her foot. Shi Mengwan tried to struggle, but she couldn't break free no matter how hard she tried. She was furious. She couldn't push Zhang Haoze away, so she opened her mouth and bit his lips hard. However, she didn't expect Zhang Haoze, who was already prepared, to let go of her at this moment. Shi Mengwan didn't notice and bit her lips. The pain made Shi Mengwan let out a low cry. She had bitten very hard just now, and the skin on her lips was even slightly broken. The pain made her even angrier. She looked at Zhang Haoze. He was still trapping her between the wall and him. She raised her eyes and looked at him. Her gaze was filled with coldness. "Let go of me." The location wasn't right, so she couldn't shout. She deliberately lowered her voice and couldn't suppress her anger. "Zhang Haoze, what do you mean? Your fiancé is still inside." "Zhang Haoze, let go of me." Zhang Haoze didn't answer her question. He looked at the anger on Shi Mengwan's face and narrowed his eyes slightly. "She's not my fiancé." This could be considered an explanation. After all, he had never had any romantic feelings for Chen Feifei. Who would believe it? Thinking about the only 2 times she met Zhang Haoze and his performance with Chen Feifei was just short of hanging on him. Even if she wasn't his fiancée, she was still his girlfriend. Shi Mengwan was silent. Her body was tightly pressed against the wall. Her gaze wasn't focused on Zhang Haoze, but on an unknown point behind him. "I understand. Mr. Zhang, can you let go of me now?" Her reaction was beyond his expectations. Zhang Haoze stared at her face and pursed his lips slightly. He looked at Shi Mengwan and had no intention of retreating. "Mr. Zhang." If he didn't move aside, she couldn't go back to the banquet hall. Although Su Qingsang wasn't the main character today, she was no different from the main character. She might not have the time to look for her, but she didn't want Su Qingsang to suspect her. "Did you take your medicine that day?" This extremely abrupt question made Shi Mengwan's expression change slightly. She seemed to suddenly understand why Zhang Haoze was blocking her way. "Mr. Zhang, what's wrong? Are you afraid that I'll use the child to threaten you or achieve some other goal?" Shi Mengwan sneered. Now, she felt that even if the other party was the dear brother that she missed dearly, she wouldn't be able to suppress the anger in her heart. "Don't worry, I've taken my medicine, and my period has already come. I'm not pregnant, and I won't use the child to do anything to you." After saying this extremely coldly, Shi Mengwan pushed Zhang Haoze's body and quickly headed in the direction of the banquet hall. The moment her body left him, Zhang Haoze raised his hand and almost grabbed her hand, but in the end, he lowered it again. He stared at Shi Mengwan's back. No one knew what he was thinking, but his gaze was deep. Shi Mengwan returned to the banquet hall and wasn't in the mood to stay any longer. Her lips were still hurting, and she had bitten them herself. She went to the bathroom to freshen up her makeup and covered up the color with lipstick. It looked normal, but it couldn't suppress her anger. She was a little angry, but because of the current occasion, she couldn't even flare up. In the banquet hall, there were also people who knew her who came to greet her. Shi Mengwan's studio was now a little famous. There were also some socialites who liked to order dresses from her. Shi Mengwan couldn't leave even if she wanted to. After patiently exchanging pleasantries with those people, Shi Mengwan finally found a chance to tell Su Qingsang that she could leave first. Su Qingsang knew that like herself, she didn't like such occasions very much. She asked her to come to her house for dinner in a few days, then waved her hand and let her go. Coming out of the banquet hall, Shi Mengwan shrunk her neck when the cold wind blew. The weather was very good today, and the sun was shining brightly. When she came, she only wore a trench coat. Now that it was late at night, even though she was wearing a coat, she still felt cold. She got into the car. Before going home, she thought that the refrigerator at home was almost empty, so she directly ordered some fruits and fresh food online. It was already very late when she got home. Shi Mengwan entered the house and had just put down her bag and changed into her home clothes when someone knocked on the door. She thought that the fresh food she ordered had arrived, so she got up to open the door. Unexpectedly, it was Shan Hausa standing outside. Shi Mengwan blocked the door with her body and glanced at Shan Hausa. He was still wearing the three-piece suit from the previous cocktail party. The light in the corridor shone on his face. He was still expressionless, but his eyes were now staring at her with a burning gaze. She felt her heart skip a beat again, and her hand behind the door couldn't help but tighten. "What's the matter?" Shan Hausa didn't say anything. His gaze swept across her body. He tore off the pajamas she wore last time. The weather was a little cooler. She was wearing a pullover-style home dress. The pink bear on the front of the cotton dress looked especially cute. It didn't match her appearance at all, but it was surprisingly harmonious. Shan Hausa didn't say anything. He took a step forward and was so close that Shi Mengwan could smell the faint scent of mint on his body. She took a deep breath and tried her best to make her voice sound normal and calm. "Mr. Zhan, what's the matter?" She deliberately kept the distance between the two of them so that Shan Hausa wouldn't discover the fluctuations in her heart. She also didn't let him know that her heartbeat was out of order because of him, and that her emotions were affected because of him. Her unapproachable appearance made Shan Hausa's brows furrow imperceptibly. "Why? You're not calling me dear brother anymore." Shi Mengwan's hands behind the door tightened. She looked up at Shan Hausa and met his eyes. "Didn't you tell me not to call you that?" "Mr. Zhan, since you don't admit that you're my dear brother, then just take it that I've recognized the wrong person. It's getting late. Please go ahead." Shi Mengwan's palm exerted force and directly slammed the door shut. Shan Hausa, who didn't expect her to do this to him, was stunned and shut outside the door by her. Shi Mengwan didn't realize what she had done until she closed the door. She leaned against the door with a very ugly expression. Yes. He clearly said that he wasn't her dear brother, and he clearly didn't admit it. Why did he have to tease her heartstrings again and again? There was another knock on the door behind her. Shi Mengwan felt angry and didn't want to pay attention to it at all. The knocking on the door stopped. In less than 2 minutes, it sounded again. Shi Mengwan still ignored it and let him stay. Who cared what he wanted to do? Since he wasn't her dear brother, she had nothing to say to him. Shi Mengwan wanted to go back to her room to take a shower, but when she heard the knock on the door again, she couldn't restrain herself. She angrily ran to open the door and said without thinking, "Shan Hausa, what do you want?" "You clearly." When she saw the delivery man standing outside with a confused face, Shi Mengwan's expression suddenly became very embarrassed. "Sorry. You, Ms. Shi Mengwan, right? We're from T-Cat Direct. These are the goods you ordered from T-Cat, thank you." Shi Mengwan awkwardly took the delivery box from the other party's hand. After signing, she was still a little embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I wasn't angry at you just now." "I know. You were angry at this gentleman, right?" The courier stood a little to the side, and Shi Mengwan realized that Shan Hausa hadn't left yet. The courier misunderstood and thought that the two of them were lovers quarreling. "Miss, even if you quarreled with your boyfriend, don't lock him outside the door. When I stepped out of the elevator just now, I was almost shocked when I saw someone." "You misunderstood, we're not, thank you for your patronage. If you're satisfied, remember to give me a 5-star rating." The courier ignored Shi Mengwan's explanation. This matter had nothing to do with him. The other party took the lift and walked towards the elevator. When he passed by Jean Hauser, he didn't forget to blink at him. "Sir, if your girlfriend is angry, you have to coax her. You have to coax her. Our Cat Direct can also order flowers online. If you need them, you can order them online at any time." This unexpected advertisement made sure Mengwan didn't know what to say. She hugged the big box and was about to close the door, but this time, she failed. Jean Hauser wasn't prepared just now, but this time, he was prepared. She was still holding a box in her hand. Before she could close the door, he had already come in. Sure Mengwan wanted to chase him out, but Jean Hauser directly closed the door. Jean Hauser. Sure Mengwan stared at him for a long time. The box in her hand was really not light. She turned around and went to the kitchen, planning to chase him away later. After entering the kitchen, Sure Mengwan had always had the habit of tidying up things properly. She took out the fruits and vegetables inside and sorted them out. She hadn't eaten anything just now and planned to make herself a bowl of noodles. Knowing that Jean Hauser wouldn't be able to chase him away for a while, Sure Mengwan decided to solve her own needs first. She would talk about it after she was full. She took out tomatoes and eggs and planned to cook tomato and egg noodles. The cabbage that was delivered today was also not bad. She washed it together. Sure Mengwan didn't like to eat whole leaves of vegetables when she cooked noodles. When she ate vegetables, she had to cut them into pieces. This was a very strange habit. Sure Mengwan cut the vegetables and processed the ingredients. Her culinary skills weren't bad. As the eldest daughter of the family, she had been studying and working outside for so many years. Her culinary skills were quite good. In less than 20 minutes, she had already taken the noodles out of the pot and scooped them up. The eggs on top were fried golden, and the tomatoes and vegetables matched well. They looked very appetizing. Sure Mengwan had forgotten that Jean Hauser was still outside. Just as she was about to take the noodles to the dining table outside, she turned around and found Jean Hauser standing at the kitchen door. He had been staring at her for an unknown period of time. She didn't know how long he had been there. Sure Mengwan's expression turned ugly again. She didn't want to pay attention to Jean Hauser. In fact, seeing him in front of her always made her uncontrollably think of what happened back then. She thought of the year when she and her dear brother depended on each other. She picked up the noodles and passed Jean Hauser to place them on the dining table. Sure Mengwan was about to sit down and eat the noodles. However, she realized that Jean Hauser had also followed her out and sat at the dining table. Sure Mengwan, who was about to eat the noodles, stopped for a moment. She looked at Jean Hauser and didn't know what was wrong with her. "President Jean, you haven't left. Do you want to eat noodles?" Jean Hauser glanced at her. Before she could react, he brought the bowl of noodles over and placed it in front of him, including the chopsticks in her hand. She was stunned for a moment and saw that Jean Hauser was like a robber. He actually started to eat the noodles that she cooked just like that. Sure Mengwan wanted to say that she was just being polite. She didn't want to treat him to noodles at all, okay? Didn't he know that this was just China-style politeness? Also, who gave him the right to come uninvited and sit in the living room of her house, eating the supper that she had prepared for herself? Jean Hauser, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.